I think we're ready. Meow, meow, meow. Hello, 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 hello. We continue where we left off yesterday with the Dark Tower. Now, I wanted to do some Sandland, honestly, because I went after stream yesterday and beat that freaking race. If you know anything that's going on with that, we need to complete all the side quests. So, all the side quests are done. We can go and continue on. But I don't think there's very much left, honestly. It's probably just like one scene or something. Who the hell knows? But yeah, I was contemplating doing that and then maybe switching off to something else. But I think we got some good momentum going with the Gunslinger. Really, really like this book. That's for sure. B D D D D D D D la 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 da 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 dee 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 beep dim 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 no 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 da 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 dum da da dum dee dee dim dim dee 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 dee. Okay, so I've made a new Insta post. Then we can go ahead. Dee 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 dee. And then we're gonna go ahead and story. And we'll link the actual video. Um, paste. All right, click that link, please. No, where's the music? Oh, where's the music? Hmm. I'm real. All right, I like that. Okay, now that we've done that, we also need to let Discord know we are live. I still haven't set up those announcements. So still haven't done it. Let me take you down, cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields. Nothing is real, and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry Fields forever. Strawberry Fields forever. Strawberry Fields forever. Dee 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 dim dim dee dim. Bum 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 ba da 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 da. Beam 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 dee 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 dim dee 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 dee. Da 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 dum dum da dum dee 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 bum 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 bum. Ba-da-dum dum. Be-dim dim dim be-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, be-dee-dee-dee-dim dim dee-dim. Bam 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 bam. Ba-dum dum dum. Da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Meow 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 meow. Bam 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 bam. Ba da da dum. Ba dum ba da na 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 dum. Copy. We're just gonna post the same thing over on the Blue Skies. Bum 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 bum. Meow 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 dum meow meow dum da 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 dum da 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 dum. Meow 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 meow. Bee dee beam bee dee deem. Da 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 dum. Da da dum dum da 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 dum. Da dum dum da dum dum da dum da dum. Dee 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 dee. Bum 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 bum. Ba da da dum da da dum da da dum dum. Dim dee 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 dim dee 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 dim ba dum ba dum ba. Meow 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 meow. All right, chat. Here's to you. Oh, I already started drinking it, but whatever. So tasty. Stay hydrated, chat. Don't forget, drink plenty of water. Not very hot, but still quite warm. All right, so we're just gonna pick up where we left off. Roland had just the gunslinger had just told his tale to Farmer Brown. Now he's on his way, heading towards the desert. Well, through the desert, basically. We're on the desert currently. Through the desert, and then hopefully to the mountains on the other side, which he learned from Sylvia Pittston exist there. Here we are, the way station. And there's this here in the beginning that I didn't read last time. Sort of hush fell over my previously busy creative life, not a writer's block, but a sense that it was time to stop goofing around with a pick and shovel and get behind the controls of one big, great God Almighty steam shovel. A sense that it was time to try to dig something big out of the sand. And so one night, I found myself sitting at my old office model Underwood and writing the words that begin this story. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. From the Afterword by Stephen King. Then they tell us to turn to the first page, which we've already done, so we don't need to do that again. But I mean, yeah, I did skip that, and I wanted to get back to it. The way station, except it's backwards for you, because nerd. Oh, Nightbot, Nightbot, wake up, Nightbot. dee dee. Night night bot, wake up. We need night bot. He's not here. Night bot, night bot. Da, dum. Damn it, Nightbot. There you are, buddy. Welcome back. We appreciate you. Thank you, Nightbot. Thank you. Thank you. There needs to be a thank you, Nightbot command. I'm thinking about that. Yep. Don't forget, follow Japan Spits. He went live. He went live yesterday, and I'm sleep. Japan Spits on the YouTube. And then Satyen Reads, we're already here. We don't need that. There's a way to speed him up, though, honestly. Meow. A nursery rhyme had been playing itself through his mind all day, the maddening kind of thing that will not let go, that stands mockingly outside the apse of conscious mind and makes faces at the rational being inside. The rhyme was, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. There is joy and also pain, but the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. Pretty plain, Lucy's saying, the ways of the world all will change, and all the ways remain the same. But if you're mad or only sane, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. We walk in love but fly in chains, and the plains in Spain fall mainly in the rain. He knew why the rhyme had occurred to him. There had been the reoccurring dream of his room in the castle and of his father, who had sung it to him as he lay solemnly in the tiny bed by the window of many colors. She did not sing it at bedtimes because all small boys born to the high speech must face the dark alone, but she sang to him at nap times, and he could remember the heavy gray rain lights that it seems like there's like an editing error though. It says she did not sing him. But it's talking about his father. Interesting. But he could remember the heavy green rain lights that shivered into colors on the counterplane. He could feel the coolness of the room and the heavy warmth of blankets, love for his mother and her red lips, the haunting melody of the little nonsense lyric, and her voice. So it's his mother singing to him. Now it came back maddeningly, like prickly heat chasing its own tail, and in his mind as he walked. All his water was gone, and he knew he was very likely a dead man. He had never expected it to come to this, and he was sorry. Since noon, he had been watching his feet rather than watching the way ahead. Out here, even the devil grass had grown stunted and yellow. The hard pan had disintegrated in places to mere rubble. The mountains were not noticeably clearer, although 16 days had passed since he had left the hut of the last homesteader, a loony sane young man on the edge of the desert. He had a raven, the gunslinger remembered, but he couldn't remember the raven's name. The raven's name, if you remember, is Zoltan. He watched his feet move up and down, listened to the nonsense rhyme sing itself into a pitiful garble in his mind, and wondered when he would fall down for the first time. He didn't want to fall, even though there was no one to see him. It was a matter of pride. A gunslinger knows pride, that invisible bone that keeps the neck stiff. He stopped and looked up suddenly. It made his head buzz, and for a moment his whole body seemed to float. The mountains dreamed against the far horizon, but there was something else up ahead, something much closer, perhaps only 5 miles away. He squinted at it, but his eyes were sandblasted and going glare blind. He shook his head and began to walk again. The rhyme circled and buzzed. About an hour later, he fell down and skinned his hands. He looked at the tiny beads of blood on his flaked skin with unbelief. The blood looked no thinner. It looked mutely viable. It seemed almost as smug as the desert. He dashed the drops away, hating them blindly. Smug? Why not? The blood was not thirsty. The blood was being served. The blood was being made sacrifice unto. Blood sacrifice. All the blood needed to do was run and run and run. He looked at the splotches that had landed on the hard pan and watched as they were sucked up with uncanny suddenness. How do you like that, blood? How does that grab you? Oh, Jesus, you're far gone. He got up, holding his hands to his chest, and the thing he had seen earlier was almost in front of him, startling a cry out of him. A dust-choked croak. It was the building. No, two buildings, surrounded by a fallen rail fence. The wood seemed old, fragile to the point of elvishness. It was wood being transmogrified into sand. One of the buildings had been a stable. The shape was clear and unmistakable. The other was a house or an inn, a way station for the coach line. The tottering sand house, the wind had crusted the wood with grits until it looked like a sandcastle that the sun had beat upon a low tide and hardened to a temporary abode. Cast a thin line of shadow, and someone sat in the shadow, leaning against the building, and the building seemed to lean with the burden of his weight. Him, then, at last, the man in black. The gunslinger stood with his hands to his chest, unaware of his declamatory posture, and gawped. And instead of the tremendous winging excitement he had expected, or perhaps fear or awe, there was nothing but dim, atavistic guilt for the sudden, raging hate of his own blood moments earlier, and the endless ring rosy of the childhood song. The rain in Spain, he moved forward, drawing one gun, falls mainly on the plain. He came the last quarter mile at a run, not trying to hide himself. There was nothing to hide behind. His short shadow raced him. He was not aware that his face had become a gray and grinning death mask of exhaustion. He was aware of nothing but the figure in the shadow. It did not occur to him until later that the figure might even have been dead. He kicked through one of the leaning fence rails. It broke into two without a sound, almost apologetically, and lunged across the dazzled and silent stable yard, bringing the gun up. You're covered! You're covered! You're. The figure moved restlessly and stood up. The gunslinger thought, my God, he's worn away to nothing. What's happened to him? Because the man in black had shrunk 2 full feet and his hair had gone white. He paused, struck dumb, his head buzzing tunelessly. His heart was racing at a lunatic rate, and he thought, I'm dying right here. He sucked the white hot air into his lungs and hung his head for a moment. When he raised it again, he saw it wasn't the man in black, but a small boy with sun-bleached hair, regarding him with eyes that did not even seem interested. The gunslinger stared at him blankly, and then shook his head in negation. But the boy survived his refusal to believe. He was still there, wearing blue jeans with a patch on one knee and a plain brown shirt of rough weave. The gunslinger shook his head again and started for the stable with his head lowered, gun still in hand. He couldn't think yet. His head was filled with motes, and there was a huge, thrumming ache building in it. The inside of the stable was silent and dark and exploding with heat. The gunslinger stared around himself with huge floating wall eyes. He made a drunken about face and saw the boy standing in the ruined doorway, staring at him. A huge lancet of pain slipped dreamily into his head, cutting from temple to temple, dividing his brain like an orange. He holstered his gun, swayed, put out his hands as if to ward off phantoms, and fell over on his face. When he woke up, he was on his back, and there was a pile of light, odorless hay beneath his head. The boy had not been able to move him, but he had made him reasonably comfortable, and he was cool. He looked down at himself and saw that his shirt was dark with moisture. He looked at his face and tasted water. He blinked at it. The boy was hunkered down beside him. When he saw the gunslinger's eyes were open, he reached behind him and gave the gunslinger a dented tin can filled with water. He grasped it with trembling hands and allowed himself to drink a little. Just a little. When that was down and sitting in his belly, he drank a little more. Then he spilled the rest over his face and made shocked blowing noises. The boy's pretty lips curved in a solemn little smile. Want something to eat? Not yet, the gunslinger said. There was still a sick ache in his head from the sunstroke, and the water sat uneasily in his stomach, as if it did not know where to go. Who are you? My name's John Chambers. You can call me Jake. The gunslinger sat up, and the sick ache became hard and immediate. He leaned forward and lost a brief struggle with his stomach. There's more, Jake said. He took the can and walked toward the rear of the stable. He paused and smiled back at the gunslinger uncertainly. The gunslinger nodded at him and then put his head down and propped it propped it with his hands. The boy was well made, handsome, perhaps 9. There had been a shadow on his face, but there were shadows on all faces now. A strange thumping hum began at the rear of the stable, and the gunslinger raised his head alertly, hands going to gun butts. The sound lasted for perhaps 15 seconds and then quit. The boy came back with the can, filled now. The gunslinger drank sparingly again, and this time it was a little better. The ache in his head was fading. I didn't know what to do with you when you fell down, Jake said. For a couple of seconds there, I thought you were going to shoot me. I thought you were somebody else. The priest? The gunslinger looked up sharply. What priest? The boy looked at him, frowning lightly. The priest. He camped in the yard. I was in the house over there. I didn't like him, so I didn't come out. He came in the night and went on the next day. I would have hidden from you, but I was sleeping when you came. He looked darkly over the gunslinger's head. I don't like people. They fucked me up. What did the priest look like? The boy shrugged. Like a priest. He was wearing black things. Like a hood and a cassock. What's a cassock? A robe. The boy nodded. A robe and a hood. Gunslinger leaned forward, and something in his face made the boy recoil a little. How long ago? Patiently the gunslinger said, I'm not going to hurt you. I don't know. I can't remember time. Every day is the same. For the first time, the gunslinger wondered consciously how the boy had come to this place, with dry, man-killing leagues of desert all around it. But he would not make it his concern, not yet at least. Make a guess. Long ago? No, not long. I haven't been here long. The fire lit in him again. He grabbed the can and drank from it with hands that trembled the smallest bit. A snatch of the cradle song recurred, but this time, instead of his mother's face, he saw the scarred face of Alice, who had been the woman in the now defunct town of Tull. How long? A week? 2? 3? The boy looked at him distractedly. Yes. Which one? A week or 2. I didn't come out. He didn't even drink. I thought he might have been a ghost of a priest. I was scared. I've been scared almost all the time. His face quivered like a crystal on the edge of the ultimate destructive high note. He didn't even build a fire. He just sat there. I don't even know if he went to sleep. Close. He was closer than he had ever been. In spite of his extreme dehydration, his hands felt faintly moist, greasy. There's some dried meat, the boy said. All right, the gunslinger nodded. Good. The boy got up to fetch it, his knees popping slightly. He made a fine, straight figure. The desert had not yet snapped him. His arms were thin, but the skin, almost tanned, had not dried and cracked. He's got juice, the gunslinger thought. He drank from the can again. He's got juice, and he didn't come from this place. A stranger from another world, maybe. What? Jake came back with a pile of dried jerky on what looked like sun-scoured breadboard. On a sun-scoured breadboard. The meat was tough, stringy, and salty enough to make the cankered lining of the gunslinger's mouth sing. He ate and drank until he felt loggy, and then settled back. The boy ate only a little. The gunslinger regarded him steadily, and the boy looked back at him. Where'd you come from, Jake? He asked finally. I don't know. I don't know, the boy frowned. I don't know. I knew when I came here, but it's all fuzzy now, like a bad dream when you wake up. I have lots of bad dreams. Did somebody bring you? No, the boy said. I was just here. Not making any sense, the gunslinger said flatly. Quite suddenly, the boy seemed on the verge of tears. Can't help it. I was just here, and now you'll go away, and I'll starve because you ate up almost all my food. I didn't ask to be here. I don't like it. It's spooky. Don't feel so sorry for yourself. Make do. I didn't ask to be here, the boy repeated bewildered defiance. Gunslinger ate another piece of the meat, chewing the salt out of it before swallowing. The boy had become part of it, and the gunslinger was convinced he told the truth. He had not asked for it. It was too bad. He had asked for it, but he had not asked for the game to become this dirty. He had not asked to be allowed to turn his guns on the unarmed populace of Tull. He had not asked to shoot Allie, her face marked by that strange shining scar. He had not asked to be faced with the choice between the obsession of his duty and his quest in criminal immorality. The man in black had begun to pull bad strings in his desperation. If it was the man in black who had pulled this particular string, it was not fair to ring the innocent bystanders and make them speak lines they didn't understand on a strange stage. Allie, he thought. Allie at least had been into the world in her own self-illusory way. But this boy, this goddamn boy. Tell me what you can remember, he told Jake. It's only a little. Doesn't seem to make any sense anymore. Tell me, maybe I can pick up the sense. There was a place, the one before this one, a high place with lots of rooms and a patio where you could look at tall buildings and water. There was a statue that stood in the water. A statue in the water? Yes, a lady with a crown and a torch. Are you making this up? Guess I must be, the boy said hopelessly. There were things to ride in on the streets. Big ones and little ones, yellow ones and lots of yellow ones. I walked to school. There were cement paths beside the streets, windows to look in, and more statues wearing clothes. Statues sold the clothes. I know it sounds crazy, but the statues sold the clothes. Gunslinger shook his head and looked for a lie on the boy's face. He saw none. I walked to school, the boy repeated fixedly, and I had a... His eyes tilted close, and his lips removed gropingly. Brown book bag. I carried a lunch, and I wore... The groping again, agonized groping. A tie. A what? I don't know. The boy's fingers made a slow, unconscious clenching motion at his throat. A gesture the gunslinger associated with the hanging. I don't know. It's just all gone. And he looked away. May I put you to sleep? The gunslinger asked. I'm not sleepy. I can make you sleepy, and I can make you remember. Doubtfully, Jake asked. How could you do that? With this. The gunslinger removed one of the shells from his gun belt and twirled it in his fingers. The movement was dexterous, as flowing as oil. The shell cartwheeled effortlessly from thumb and index and second, to second and ring to ring and pinky. It popped out of sight and reappeared, seemed to float briefly and then reversed. The shell walked across the gunslinger's fingers. The fingers themselves moved like a beaded curtain in the breeze. The boy watched, his initial doubt replaced with plain delight, then by raptness. Then, by a dawning mute blankness, the eyes slipped shut. The shell danced back and forth. Jake's eyes opened again, caught the steady, limpid dance between the gunslinger's fingers for a while longer, and then his eyes closed once more. The gunslinger continued, but Jake's eyes did not open again. The boy breathed with steady bovine calmness. Was this part of it? Yes. There was a certain beauty, a logic, like the lacy frettings that fringed hard blue ice packs. He seemed to hear the sound of the wind chimes. Not for the first time, the gunslinger tasted the smooth, laudant taste of soul sickness. The shell in his fingers, manipulated with such unknown grace, was suddenly undead, horrific, the spoor of a monster. He dropped it into his palm and closed it into a fist with a painful force. There were such things as rape in the world, rape and murder, and unspeakable practices, and all of them were for the good and bloody good, for the myth, for the grail, for the tower. Ah, the tower stood somewhere, rearing its black bulk to the sky, and in his desert scoured ears, the gunslinger heard the faint, sweet sound of wind chimes. Where are you? He asked. Jake Chambers is going downstairs with his book bag. There's earth science, there's economic geography, there's a notepad, a pencil, a lunch his mother's cook, Miss Greta Shaw, has made for him in the chrome and formica kitchen, where a fan whirs eternally, sucking up alien odors. In his lunch sack, he has a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a bologna, lettuce, and onion sandwich, and 4 Oreo cookies. His parents do not hate him, but they seem to have overlooked him. They have abdicated and left him to Miss Greta Shaw, to nannies, to a tutor in the summer, and the school, which is private and nice, and most of all, white, the rest of the time. None of these people have ever pretended to be more than what they are professional people, the best in their fields. None have folded him to a particularly warm bosom, as usually happens in the historical novels his mother reads, and which Jake has dipped into, looking for the hot parts. Hysterical novels, his father sometimes calls them, and sometimes bodice rippers. You should talk, his mother says, with infinite scorn from behind some closed door where Jake listens. His father works for the network, and Jake could pick him out of a lineup, probably. Jake does not know that he hates all the professional people, but he does. People have always bewildered him. He likes stairs and will not use the self service elevator in his building. His mother, who is scrawny in a sexy way, often goes to bed with sick friends. Now he is on the street. Jake Chambers is on the street. He has hit the bricks. He's clean and well mannered, comely, sensitive. He has no friends, only acquaintances. He has never bothered to think about this, but it hurts him. He does not know or understand that a long association with professional people has caused him to take many of their traits. Miss Greta Shaw. Wait, one sec. We're trapped. We're trapped. It's a trap. Miss Greta Shaw makes very professional sandwiches. She quarters them and cuts off the bread crusts so that when he eats in the gym period 4, he looks like he ought to be at a cocktail party with a drink in the other hand instead of a sports novel from the school library. His father makes a great deal of money because he is a master of the kill, that is, placing a stronger show on his network against a weaker show on a rival network. His father smokes 4 packs of cigarettes a day. His father does not cough, but he has a hard grin like the steak knives that they sell in supermarkets. Down in the street, his mother leaves a cab fare, but he walks every day it doesn't rain, swinging his book bag, a small boy who looks very American with his blond hair and blue eyes. Girls have already begun to notice him with their mother's approval, and he does not shy away with skittish little boy arrogance. He talks to them with unknowing professionalism and puzzles them away. He likes geography and bowls in the afternoon. His father owns stock in a company that makes automatic pin setting machinery, but the bowling alley Jake patronizes does not use his father's brand. He does not think he has thought about this, but he has. Walking down the street, he passes by Brendio's, where the models stand dressed in fur coats and 6-button Edwardian suits, some in nothing at all. Some are bare naked. These models, these mannequins, are perfectly professional, and he hates all professionalism. He is too young to have learned to hate himself yet, but that seed is already there. It has been planted in the bitterest cleft of his heart. He comes to the corner and stands with his book bag at his side. Traffic roars by, grunting buses, taxis, Volkswagens, a large truck. He is just a boy, but not average, and he sees the man who kills him out of the corner of his eye. It is the man in black, and he doesn't see the face, only the swirling robe, the outstretched hands. He falls into the street with his arms outstretched, not letting go of the book bag, which contains Miss Greta Shaw's extremely professional lunch. There's a brief glance through a polarized windshield and the horrified face of a businessman wearing a dark blue hat in the band of which is a small jaunty feather. An old woman on the far curb screams she is wearing a black hat with a net. Nothing jaunty about that black net. It's like a mourner's veil. Jake feels nothing but surprise and his usual sense of headlong bewilderment. Is this how it ends? He lands hard in the street and looks at an asphalt sealed crack some 2 inches from his eyes. The book bag is jolted from his hand. He is wondering if he has skinned his knees when the car of the businessman wearing the blue hat with a jaunty feather passes over him. It is the big blue 1976 Cadillac with 16-inch wheels. It is almost exactly the same color as the businessman's hat. It breaks Jake's back, mushes his stomach, and sends blood from his mouth into a high pressure jet. He turns his head and sees the Cadillac's flaming taillights and smoke spurting from beneath its locked rear wheels. The car has also run over his book bag and left a wide black tread on it. He turns his head the other way and sees a large yellow Ford screaming to a stop, inches from his body. A black fellow who has been selling pretzels and sodas from a pushcart is coming toward him on the run. Blood runs from Jake's nose, ears, eyes, rectum. His genitals have been squashed. He wonders irritably how badly he has skinned his knees. Now the driver of the Cadillac is running towards him, babbling. Somewhere a terrible calm voice, the voice of doom, says, "I am a priest. Let me through." An act of contrition. He sees the black robe and knows sudden horror. It is him, the man in black. He turns his face away with the last of his strength. Somewhere a radio is playing a song by the rock group Kiss. He sees his own hand trailing on the pavement, small, white, shapely. He has never bitten his nails. Looking at his hand, Jake dies. The gunslinger sat in frowning thought. He was tired and his body ached, and the thoughts came with aggravating slowness. Across from him, the amazing boy slept with his hands folded in his lap, still breathing calmly. He had told his tale without much emotion, although his voice had trembled near the end, when he had come to the part about the priest and the act of contrition. He had not, of course, told the gunslinger about his family and his own sense of bewildered dichotomy, but that had seeped through anyway. Enough had seeped through to make out its shape. The fact that there had never been such a city as the boy described, or, if so, it had only existed in the myth of prehistory, was not the most upsetting part of the story, but it was disturbing. It was all disturbing. The gunslinger was afraid of the implications. Jake. Uh-huh. Do you want to remember this when you wake up, or forget it? Forget it, the boy said promptly. I bled. All right, you're going to sleep, understand? Go ahead and lie over. Jake laid over, looking small and peaceful and harmless. The gunslinger did not believe he was harmless. There was a deadly feeling about him, and the stink of predestination. He didn't like the feeling, but he liked the boy. He liked him a great deal. Jake, shh, I want to sleep. Yes, and you wake up, and yes, and when you wake up, you won't remember any of this. Okay. Gunslinger watched him for a brief time, thinking of his own boyhood, which usually seemed to have happened to another person, to a person who jumped through some osmotic lens and became someone else, but which now seemed poignantly close. It was very hot in the stable of the way station, and he carefully drank some more water. He got up and walked to the back of the building, pausing to look into one of the horse stalls. There was a small pail of white hay in the corner and a neatly folded blanket, but there was no smell of horse. There was no smell of anything in the stable. The sun had bled away every smell and left nothing. The air was perfectly neutral. At the back of the stable was a small dark room with a stainless steel machine in the center. It was untouched by rust or rot. It looked like a butter churn. At the left, a chrome pipe jutted from it, terminating over a drain in the floor. The gunslinger had seen pumps like it in other dry places, but never one so big. He could not contemplate how deep they must have drilled before they struck water, secret and forever black under the desert. Why hadn't they removed the pump when they hit the station? Why hadn't they removed the pump when the way station had been abandoned? Demons, perhaps. He shuddered abruptly, an abrupt twisting of his back. Heat flesh poked out on the skin, then receded. He went to the control switch and pushed the on button. The machine began to hum. After perhaps half a minute, a stream of cool, clear water belched from the pipe and went down the drain to be recirculated. Perhaps 3 gallons flowed out of the pipe before the pump shut itself down with a final click. It was a thing as alien to this place and time as true love, and yet as concrete as a judgment, a silent reminder of the time when the world had not yet moved on. It probably ran on an automatic slug, as there was no electricity within 1,000 miles of here, and even dry batteries would have lost their charge long ago. The gunslinger didn't like it. He went back and sat down beside the boy, who had put one hand under his cheek. Nice looking boy. The gunslinger drank some more water and crossed his legs so he was sitting Indian fashion. The boy, like the squatter on the edge of the desert who kept the bird, Zoltan, The gunslinger remembered abruptly. The bird's name was Zoltan, had lost his sense of time, but the fact that the man in black was closer seemed beyond doubt. Not for the first time, the gunslinger wondered if the man in black was letting him catch up for some reason of his own. Perhaps the gunslinger was playing into his hands. He tried to imagine what the confrontation might be like and could not. It was very hot, but he no longer felt sick. The nursery rhyme occurred to him again, but this time, instead of his mother, he thought of Court. Court, with his face hem-stitched with the scars of bricks and bullets and blunt instruments, the scars of war. He wondered if Court had ever had a love to match those monumental scars. He doubted it. He thought of Eileen and Martin, that incomplete enchanter. The gunslinger was not a man to dwell on the past. Only the shadowy conception of the future and of his own emotional makeup saved him from being a creature without imagination, a dullard. His present run of thought therefore rather amazed him. Each name called upon the others: Cuthbert, Paul, the old man Jonas, and Susan, the lovely girl at the window. The piano player in Tull, also dead, all dead in Tull, and by his hand, had been fond of the old songs, and the gunslinger hummed one tunelessly under his breath. Love, oh careless love, see what careless love has done. The gunslinger laughed, bemused. I am the last of that green and warm-hued world, and for all this nostalgia, he felt no self-pity. The world had moved on mercilessly, but his legs were still strong, and the man in black was closer. The gunslinger nodded out. When he woke up, it was almost dark and the boy was gone. The gunslinger got up, hearing his joints pop, and went to the stable door. There was a small flame dancing in the darkness on the porch of the inn. He walked towards it, his shadow long and black, trailing in the ochre light of the sunset. Jake was sitting by a kerosene lamp. The oil was in a drum. He said, "But I was scared to burn it in the house. Everything's so dry." "You did just right." The gunslinger sat down, seeing, but not thinking about the dust of years that puffed up around his rump. The flame from the lamp shadowed the boy's face with delicate tones. The gunslinger produced his poke and rolled a cigarette. "We have to talk," he said. Jake nodded. "Guess you know I'm on the prod for that man you saw. You gonna kill him?" "I don't know. I have to make him tell me something. I might have to make him take me someplace." "Where?" "To find a tower," the gunslinger said. He held a cigarette over the chimney of the lamp and drew on it. The smoke drifted away on the rising night breeze. Jake watched it. His face showed neither fear nor curiosity, certainly not enthusiasm. "So I'm going on tomorrow," the gunslinger said. "You'll have to come with me. How much of that meat is left?" "Only a handful." "Corn?" "A little." The gunslinger nodded. "Is there a cellar?" "Yes." Yes. Jake looked at him. The pupils of his eyes had grown to a huge, fragile size. "You pull up on a ring in the floor, but I didn't go down. I was afraid the ladder I was afraid the ladder would break, and I wouldn't be able to get up again. And it smells bad. It's the only thing around here that smells at all. We'll get up early and see if there's anything down there worth taking. Then we'll bug out." All right, the boy paused and then said, "I'm glad I didn't kill you when you were sleeping. I had a pitchfork, and I thought about doing it, but I didn't. And now I won't have to be afraid to go to sleep." Excuse me. "What would you be afraid of?" The boy looked at him ominously. "Spooks. Of him coming back." "The man in black," the gunslinger said, not a question. "The man in black," the gunslinger said, not a question. "Yes. Is he a bad man?" "That depends on where you're standing," the gunslinger said absently. He got up and pitched his cigarette out onto the hard pan. "I'm going to sleep." The boy looked at him timidly. "Can I sleep in the stable with you?" "Of course." The gunslinger stood up on the steps, looking up, and the boy joined him. Polaris was there, and Mars. It seemed to the gunslinger that if he closed his eyes, he would be able to hear the croaking of the first spring peepers, smell the green and almost summer smell of the lawns after their first cutting, and hear perhaps the indolent click of the croquet balls as the ladies of the East Wing, attired only in their shifts as dusk glimmered towards dark, played at points. Could almost see Eileen as she came through the break in the hedges. It was not like him to think so much of the past. He turned back and picked up the lamp. "Let's go to sleep," he said. They crossed to the stable together. The next morning he explored the cellar. Jake was right. It smelled bad. It had a wet, swampy smell that made the gunslinger feel nauseous and a little light-headed after the antiseptic odorlessness of the desert and the stable. The cellar smelled of cabbages and turnips and potatoes with long, sightless eyes gone to everlasting rot. The latter, however, seemed quite sturdy, and he climbed down. The floor was earthen, and his head almost touched the overhead beams. Down here, spiders still lived, disturbingly big ones with mottled gray bodies. Many of them had mutated. Some had eyes on stalks. Some had what might have been have Some had what might have been as many as 16 legs. The gunslinger peered around and waited for his night eyes. You all right? Jake called down nervously. Yes, he focused on the corner. There are cans. Wait. He went carefully to the corner, ducking his head. There was an old box with one side folded down. The cans were vegetables, green beans, yellow beans, and 3 cans of corned beef. He scooped up an armload and went back to the ladder, climbed halfway up, and handed them to Jake, who knelt to receive them. He went back for more. It was on the third trip that he heard the groaning in the foundations. He turned, looked, and felt a kind of dreamy terror wash over him, a feeling both languid and repellent, like sex in the water, one drowning within another. The foundation was composed of huge sandstone blocks that had probably been evenly cornered when the way station was new, which were now at every zigzag, which were, but which were now at every zigzag, drunken angle, and made the wall look as if it were inscribed with strange, meandering hieroglyphics. And from the joining of 2 of these abstruse cracks, a thin spill of sand was running, as if something on the other side was digging itself through with slobbering, agonized intensity. The groaning rose and fell, becoming louder until the whole cellar was full of the sound, an abstract noise of ripping pain and dreadful effort. Come up, Jake screamed. Oh, Jesus, mister, come up. Go away, the gunslinger said calmly. Come up, Jake screamed again. The gunslinger did not answer. He pulled leather with his right hand. He pulled leather with his right hand. There was a hole in the wall now, a hole as big as a coin. He could hear, through the curtain of his own terror, Jake's pattering feet as the boy ran. Then the spill of sand stopped. Groaning ceased, but there was a sound of steady, labored breathing. Who are you? The gunslinger asked. No answer. And in the high speech, his voice filling with the old thunder of command, Roland demanded, Who are you, demon? Speak if you would speak. My time is short. My hands lose patience. Go slow, a dragging, coddled voice said from within the wall, and the gunslinger felt the dreamlike terror deepen and grow almost solid. It was the voice of Alice, the woman he had stayed with in the town of Tull. But she was dead. He had seen her go down himself, a bullet hole between her eyes. Fathoms seemed to swim by his eyes, descending. Go slow past the drawers, gunslinger. While you travel with the boy, the man in black travels with your soul in his pocket. What do you mean? Speak on. But the breathing was gone. Gunslinger stood up for a moment, frozen, and then one of the huge spiders dropped on his arm and scrambled frantically up to his shoulder. With an involuntary grunt, he brushed it away and got his feet moving. He did not want to do it, but custom was strict and voluble. The dead from the the dead from the dead, as the old proverb has it. Only a corpse may speak. He went to the hole and punched at it. The sandstone crumbled easily at the edges, and with a bare stiffening of muscles, he thrust his hand through the wall and touched something solid. With raised and fretted knobs, he drew it out. He held the jawbone, rotted at the far hinge. The teeth leaned this way and that. All right, he said softly. He thrust it rudely into his back pocket and went back up the ladder, carrying the last cans awkwardly. He left the trapdoor open. The sun would get in and kill the spiders. Jake was halfway across the stable yard, cowering on the cracked, rubbly hardpan. He screamed when he saw the gunslinger, backed away a step or two, and then ran to him, crying, "Thought it got you. That it got you. I thought it didn't." He held the boy to him, feeling his face hot against his chest and his hands dry against his rib cage. It occurred to him later that this is when he began to love the boy, which was, of course, what the man in black must have planned all along. Was it a demon? The voice was muffled. Yes, a speaking demon. We don't have to go back there anymore. Come on. They went to the stable, and the gunslinger made a rough pack from the blanket he had slept under. It was hot and prickly, but there was nothing else. That done, he filled the water bags from the pump. You carry one of the water bags, the gunslinger said. Wear it around your shoulders, like a faker carries his snake. See? Yes, the boy looked up at him worshipfully. He slung one of the bags. Is it too heavy? No, it's fine. Tell me the truth now. I can't carry you if you get a sunstroke. I won't have a sunstroke. I'll be okay. The gunslinger nodded. We're going to the mountains, aren't we? Yes. They walked out into the steady smash of the sun. Jake, his head as high as the swing of the gunslinger's elbows, walked to his right and a little ahead. The rawhide wrapped ends of the water bag hanging nearly to his shins. The gunslinger had crisscrossed 2 more water bags across his shoulders and carried the sling of food in his armpit, his left arm holding it against his body. They passed through the far gate of the way station and found the blurred ruts of the stage track again. They had walked perhaps 15 minutes when Jake turned around and waved at the 2 buildings. They seemed to huddle in the titanic space of the desert. Goodbye, Jake cried. Goodbye. They walked. The stage track breasted a frozen sand drumlin, and when the gunslinger looked around, the way station was gone. Once again, there was desert, and that's only. They were 3 days out of the way station. The mountains were deceptively clear now. They could see the rise of the desert into the foothills, the first naked slopes, the bedrock bursting through the skins of the earth in sullen eroded triumph. Further up, the land gentled off briefly again, and for the first time in months or years, the gunslinger could see green. Real, living green. Grass, dwarf spruces, perhaps even willows, all fed by snow runoff from further up. Beyond that, rock took over again, rising in cyclopean tumbled splendor to the blinding snow caps. Off to the left, a huge slash showed the way to a smaller, eroded sandstone cliffs and mesas and buttes on the far side. This draw was obscured in the almost continual gray membrane of showers. At night, Jake would sit fascinated for minutes before he fell into sleep, watching the brilliant swordplay of the far off lightning, white and purple, startling in the clarity of the night air. The boy was fine on the trail. He was tough, but more than that, he seemed to fight exhaustion with a calm and professional reservoir of which the gunslinger fully appreciated. He did not talk much, and he did not ask questions, not even about the jawbone, which the gunslinger turned over and over in his hands during his evening smoke. He caught a sense that the boy felt highly flattered by the gunslinger's companionship, perhaps even exalted by it, and this disturbed him. The boy had been placed in his path. While you travel with the boy, the man in black travels with your soul in his pocket. And the fact that Jake was not slowing him down only opened the way to more sinister possibilities. They passed the symmetrical campfire leavings of the man in black at regular intervals, and it seemed to the gunslinger that these leavings were much fresher now. The third night, the gunslinger was sure he could see the distant spark of another campfire somewhere in the first rising swells of the foothills. Near 2 o'clock on the fourth day out from the way station, Jake reeled and almost fell. Here, sit down, the gunslinger said. No, I'm okay. Sit down. The boy sat obediently. The gunslinger squatted close by so Jake would be in his shadow. Drink. Not supposed to until. Drink. The boy drank 3 swallows. The gunslinger wet the tail of the blanket, which was lighter now, and applied the damp fabric to the boy's wrists and forehead, which were fever dry. From now on, we rest every afternoon at this time. 15 minutes. Do you want to sleep? No. The boy looked at him with shame. The gunslinger looked back blandly. In an abstracted way, he withdrew one of the bullets from his belt and began to twirl it between his fingers. The boy watched, fascinated. That's neat, he said. The gunslinger nodded. Sure it is, he paused. When I was your age, I lived in a walled city. Did I tell you that? The boy shook his head sleepily. Sure. And there was an evil man. The priest? No, the gunslinger said. But the two of them had some relationship. I think now. Maybe even half brothers. Martin was a wizard, like Merlin. Do they tell of Merlin where you come from, Jake? Merlin and Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, Jake said dreamily. Gunslinger felt a nasty jolt go through him. Yes, he said. I was very young, but the boy was asleep, sitting up, his hands folded neatly into his lap. When I snap my fingers, you'll wake up. You'll be rested and fresh. Do you understand? Yes. Lay over then. The gunslinger got makings from his poke and rolled a cigarette. There was something missing. He searched for it in his diligent, careful way and located it. The missing thing was that maddening sense of hurry, the feeling that he might be left behind at any time, that the trail would die out and he would be left with only a broken piece of string. All that was gone now, and the gunslinger was slowly becoming sure that the man in black wanted to be caught. What would follow? The question was too vague to catch his interest. Cuthbert would have found interest in it, lively interest, but Cuthbert was gone, and the gunslinger could only go forward in the way he knew. He watched the boy as he smoked, and his mind turned back on Cuthbert, who had always laughed. To his death he had gone laughing. Court, who never laughed, and a Martin, who sometimes smiled, a thin, silent smile that had its own disquieting gleam, like an eye that slips open in the dark and discloses blood. And there have been the falcon, of course. The falcon was named David, after the legend of the boy with the sling. David, he was quite sure, knew nothing but the need for murder, rending and terror, like the gunslinger himself. David was no dilettante. He played the censor of the court. Perhaps, though, in some final accounting, David, the falcon, had been closer to Martin than to anyone else. Perhaps his mother, Gabrielle, had known it. The gunslinger's stomach seemed to rise painfully against his heart, but his face didn't change. He watched the smoke of his cigarette rise into the hot desert air and disappear, and his mind went back. Chapter 2 of the way station. I just noticed, yeah, we've been going for quite some time without like any breaks. The way station's almost done too. 10 more pages or so. And then the Oracle in the Mountains. Low mutants. Oracle in the Mountains is not very long. We will get through that. I think what's we still got plenty of time. We haven't barely started. We barely started. We'll get through the Oracle, low mutant. We'll save the slow mutants and the gunslinger and the dark man for the next time. How about that? That sounds good. And then we got the afterword. Add that to that as well. Okay, sounds good. Yeah. Perfecto. Muy bien. Meow 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 meow. Let's take a quick break though. Uh, 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 So they found it. They've made their way to the mountains. They're there at the base, the foothills, more or less, and it seems to be another trap. The man in black has left Jake here for Roland to become attached to, but for what purpose? For what sinister purpose has he given Roland, the gunslinger, this companion? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but it just his name just it comes so easily. The gunslinger, the gunslinger, the gunslinger. For if I say it 3 times, it must be true. Jake Chambers, a boy from another world, another time, possibly a huge city called New York that the gunslinger can't even imagine. So good, so good. Chapter 2. The sky was white, perfectly white, and the smell of rain was in the air. The smell of hedges and growing green was strong and sweet. It was deep spring. David sat on Cuthbert's arm, a small engine of destruction with bright golden eyes that glared outward at nothing. The rawhide leash attached to his jesses were looped carelessly about Cuthbert's arm. Court stood aside from the two boys in a silent figure in patched leather trousers and a green cotton shirt that had been cinched high with his old wide infantry belt. The green of his shirt merged with the hedges and the rolling turf of the black courts where the ladies had not yet begun to play at points. Get ready, Roland whispered to Cuthbert. We're ready, Cuthbert said confidently. Aren't we, Davy? They spoke the low speech, of the language of both scullions and squires. The day when they would be allowed to use their own tongue in the presence of others was still far. It's a beautiful day for it. Can you smell the rain? Cord abruptly raised the trap in his hands and let the side fall open. The dove was out and up, trying for the sky in a quick fluttering blast of its wings. Cuthbert pulled the leash, but he was slow, and the hawk was already up, and his takeoff was awkward. With a brief twitch of its wings, the hawk had recovered. It struck upward, gaining altitude over the dove, moving bullet swift. Court walked over to where the boys stood, casually, and swung his huge and twisted fist at Cuthbert's ear. The boy fell over without a sound, although his lips writhed back from his gums. A trickle of blood flowed slowly from his ear and onto the rich green grass. You were slow, he said. Cuthbert was struggling to his feet. I'm sorry, Court. It's just that I. Court swung again, and Cuthbert fell over. The blood flowed more swiftly now. Speak the high speech, he said softly. His voice was flat with a slight drunken rasp. Speak your act of contrition in the speech of civilization, for which better men than you will ever have died, maggot. Cuthbert was getting up again. Tears stood brightly in his eyes, but his lips were pressed tightly together in a bright line of hate which did not quiver. I grieve, Cuthbert said in a voice of breathless control. I have forgotten the face of my father, whose guns I hoped to some day bear. That's right, brat, Court said. You'll consider what you did wrong, and bookend your reflections with hunger. No supper, no breakfast. Look, Roland cried. He pointed up. The hawk had climbed above the soaring dove. It glided for a moment, its stubby, muscular wings outstretched, and without movement on the still, white spring air. Then it folded its wings and dropped like a stone. The two bodies came together, and for a moment Roland fancied he could see blood in the air.
But it might have been his imagination. The hawk gave a brief scream of triumph. Dove fluttered, twisting to the ground, and Roland ran toward the kill, leaving Court and chastened Cuthbert behind him. The hawk had landed beside its prey and was complacently tearing into its plump white breast. A few feathers seesawed slowly downward. David! The boy yelled and tossed the hawk a piece of rabbit flesh from his poke. The hawk caught it on the fly, ingested it with an upward shaking of its back and throat, and Roland attempted to release the bird. The hawk whirled almost absent-mindedly and ripped skin from Roland's arm in a long, dangling gash. Then it went back to its meal. With a grunt, Roland looped the leash again, this time catching David's diving, slashing beak on the leather gauntlet he wore. He gave the hawk another piece of meat, then hooded it. Docilely, David climbed onto his wrist. He stood up proudly, the hawk on his arm. What's this? Cord asked, pointing to the dripping slash on Roland's forearm. The boy stationed himself to receive the blow, locking his throat against any possible cry, but no blow fell. He struck me, Roland said. You pissed him off, Court said. The hawk does not fear you, boy, and the hawk never will. The hawk is God's gunslinger. Roland merely looked at Court. He was not an imaginative boy, and if Court had intended to imply a moral, it was lost on him. He was pragmatic enough to believe that it might have been one of the few foolish statements he had ever heard Court make. Cuthbert came up behind them and struck his tongue out at Court, safely on his blind side. Roland did not smile, but nodded to him. Go in now, Court said, taking the hawk. He pointed at Cuthbert. But remember your reflection, maggot, and your fast, tonight and tomorrow morning. Yes, Cuthbert said, stilted formal now. Thank you for this instructive day. You learned, Court said, but your tongue has a bad habit of lolling from your stupid mouth when your instructor's back is turned. Mayhaps the day will come when it and you will learn their respective places. He struck Cuthbert again, this time solidly between the eyes and hard enough so that Roland heard a dull thud. The sound a mullet, the sound a mallet makes when a scullion taps a keg of beer. Cuthbert fell backwards onto the lawn, his eyes cloudy and dazed at first. Then they cleared, and he stared burningly up at Court, his hatred unveiled. A pinprick as bright as the dove's blood in the center of each eye. Cuthbert nodded and parted his lips in a scarifying smile that Roland had never seen. Then there's hope for you, Court said. When you think you can, you come for me, maggot. How did you know? Cuthbert said between his teeth. Court turned toward Roland so swiftly that Roland almost fell back a step, and then both of them would have been on the grass, decorating the new green with their blood. I saw it reflected in this maggot's eyes, he said. Remember it, Cuthbert. Last lesson for today. Cuthbert nodded again, the same frightening smile on his face. I grieve, he said. I have forgotten the face. Cut that shit, Court said, losing interest. He turned to Roland. Go on now, the both of you. If I have to look at your stupid maggot faces any longer, I'll puke my guts. Come on, Roland said. Cuthbert shook his head to clear it and got to his feet. Court was already walking down the hill in his squat, bow-legged stride, looking powerful and somehow prehistoric. The shaved and grizzled spot at the top of his head loomed at a slant, hunched. I'll kill the son of a bitch, Cuthbert said, still smiling. A large goose egg, purple and knotted, was rising mystically on his forehead. Got knocked the crap out of him. He got the crap knocked out of him. Not you or me, Roland said, suddenly bursting into a grin. You can have supper in the West Kitchen with me. Cook will give us some. He'll tell Court. He's no friend of Court's, Roland said, and then shrugged. And what if he did? Cuthbert grinned back. Sure, right. I always wanted to know how the world looked when your head was on backwards and upside down. They started back together over the green lawns, casting shadows in the fine white spring light. The cook in the West Kitchen was named Hax. He stood huge in food-stained whites, a man with crude oil complexion, whose ancestry was a quarter black, a quarter yellow, and a quarter from the South Islands, now almost forgotten. The world had moved on. And a quarter God knew what. He shuffled about three high-ceilinged steamy rooms like a tractor in low gear, wearing huge caliph-like slippers. He was one of those quite rare adults who communicate with small children fairly well and who love them all impartially, not in a sugary way, but in a business-like fashion that may sometimes entail a hug in the same way that closing a big business deal may call for a handshake. He even loved the boys who had begun the training, although they were different from other children, not always demonstrative and somehow dangerous, not in an adult way, but rather as if they were ordinary children with a slight touch of madness. Cuthbert was not the first of Court's students whom he had fed on the sly. At this moment, he stood in front of his huge rambling electric stove, one of 6 working appliances left on the whole estate. It was his personal domain, and he stood there watching the 2 boys bolt the meat scraps he had produced. Behind, before, and all around, cook boys, scullions, and various underlings rushed through the foaming, humid air, rattling pans, stirring stew, slaving over potatoes and vegetables in nether regions. In the dimly lit pantry alcove, a washerwoman with a doughy, miserable face and her hair caught up in a rag splashed water around on the floor with a mop. One of the scullery boys rushed up with a man from the guards in tow. This man, he wants you, Hax. All right, Hax nodded to the guard, and he nodded back. You boys, he said, go over to Maggie. She'll give you some pie. Then scat. They nodded and went over to Maggie, who gave them huge wedges of pie on dinner plates, but gingerly, as if they were wild dogs that might bite her. Let's eat it on the stairs, Cuthbert said. All right. They sat behind a huge sweating stone colonnade made out of. They sat behind a huge sweating stone colonnade out of sight of the kitchen and gobbled their pie with their fingers. It was only moments later that they saw shadows fall on the far curving wall of the wide staircase. Roland grabbed Cuthbert's arm. Come on, he said. Someone's coming. Cuthbert looked up, his face surprised and berry stained. But the shadows stopped, still out of sight. It was Hax and the man from the guards. The boys sat where they were. If they moved now, they might be heard. The good man, the guard was saying. And Farson? In 2 weeks, the guard replied. Maybe 3. You have to come with us. There's a shipment from the freight depot. A particularly loud crash of pots and pans and a volley of catcalls directed at the hapless potboy who had dropped them blotted out some of the rest, and the boys heard the guard finish. Poisoned meat. Risky. Not what the good man can. Ask not what the good man can do for you, the guard began, but what you can do for him, Hax sighed. Soldier asks not. You know what it could mean, the guard said quietly. Yes, and I know my responsibilities to him. You don't need to lecture me. I love him just as you do. All right, the meat will be marked for short-term storage in your cold rooms, but you'll have to be quick. You must understand that. There are children in Farson? The cook asked sadly. It was not really a question. Children everywhere, the guard said gently. It's the children he care about. Poisoned meat. Such a strange way to care for children. Hax uttered a heavy, whistling sigh. Will they curdle and hold their bellies and cry for their mamas? I suppose they will. It'll be like going to sleep, the guard said, but his voice too confidently reasonable. Of course, Hax said and laughed. Said it yourself, soldier ask not. Do you enjoy seeing children under the rule of the gun, when they could be under his hands, who makes the lion lie down with the lamb? Hax did not reply. I go on duty in 20 minutes, the guard said, his voice once more calm. Give me a joint of mutton, and I will pinch one of your girls and make her giggle. When I leave, my mutton will give no cramps to your belly, Robeson. Will you? But the shadows moved away, and the voices were lost. I could have killed them, Roland thought, frozen and fascinated. I could have killed them both with my knife, slit their throats like hogs. He looked at his hands, now stained with gravy and berries, as well as dirt from the day's lessons. Roland. He looked at Cuthbert. They looked at each other for a long moment in their fragrant semi-darkness, and a taste of warm despair rose in Roland's throat. What he felt might have been a sort of death, something as brutal and final as the death of the dove in the white sky over the games field. Hax? He thought, bewildered. Hax, who put poultice on my leg that time. Hax! And his mind snapped closed, cutting the subject off. What he saw, even in Cuthbert's humorous, intelligent face, was nothing. Nothing at all. Cuthbert's eyes were flat with Hax's doom. Cuthbert's eyes, it had already happened. He had fed them, and they had gone to the stairs to eat, and then Hax had brought the guard, named Robeson, to the wrong corner of the kitchen for the treasonous little tete-a-tete. That was all. In Cuthbert's eyes, Roland saw that Hax would die for his treason, as a viper dies in a pit. That and nothing else. Nothing at all. They were Gunslinger's eyes. So court says, yeah, maggots, you Cuthbert, you're not allowed to eat. And they go and they get some food from this kindly guy, Hax, the cook, who always looks after Roland, who I guess is the right? Is he the gunslinger? Roland. Yeah, I spoiled it. I'm sorry. But yeah, he's plotting. He's plotting against the this place that they live in. Gonna feed the children some poisoned meat. Roland's father was only just back from the uplands, and he looked out of place amid the drapes and the chiffon fripperies of the main receiving hall that the boy had only lately been granted access to, a sign of his apprenticeship. Though Roland has become an apprentice, he's gaining some responsibilities and rank. His father was dressed in black jeans and a blue work shirt. His cloak, dusty and streaked, torn to the lining in one place, was slung carelessly over his shoulder with no regard for the way it and he clashed with the elegance of the room. He was desperately thin, and the heavy handlebar mustache below his nose seemed to weight his head as he looked down at his son. The guns crisscrossed over the wings of his hips, hung at the perfect angle for his hands. The worn sandalwood handles looking dull and sleepy in this languid indoor light. The head cook, his father said softly. Imagine it. Tracks that were blown upland at the railhead, the dead stock in Hedrickson, and perhaps even imagine. He looked more closely at his son. Praise on you, like the hawk, Roland said. Praise on you, he laughed, starting appropriateness of the image rather than any lightness in the situation. Father smiled. Yes, Roland said. I guess it preys on me. Cuthbert was with you, his father said. He will have told his father by now. Yes. Fed both of you in court? Yes. And Cuthbert, does it prey on him, do you think? I don't know. Such an avenue of comparison did not really interest him. He was not concerned with how his feelings compared with those of others. It preys on you because you feel you've killed. Roland shrugged unwillingly, all at once, not content with the probing of his own motivations. Yet you told. Why? The boy's eyes widened. How could I not? Treason was. His father waved a hand curtly. You did it for something as cheap as a schoolbook idea. You did it unworthily. I would rather see all of Farson poisoned. I didn't. The words jerked out him violently. I wanted to kill him. Both of them. Liars. Snakes. They. Go ahead. They hurt me, he finished defiant. They did something to me. Changed me. I wanted to kill them for it. His father nodded. That is worthy. Not moral, but it's not your place to be moral. In fact, he peered at his son. Morals may always be beyond you. You're not quick like Cuthbert or Wheeler's boy. It will make you formidable. The boy, impatient before this, felt both pleased and troubled. He will hang. The boy nodded. I want to see it. Roland the elder threw his head back and roared laughter. Not as formidable as I thought, or perhaps just stupid. He closed his mouth abruptly. An arm shot out like a bolt of lightning, and he grabbed the boy's upper arm painfully. He grimaced, but did not flinch. His father peered at him steadily, and the boy looked back, although it was more difficult than holding the hawk had been. All right, he said, and turned abruptly to go. Father? What? Do you know who they were talking about? Do you know who the good man is? His father turned back and looked at him speculatively. Yes, I think I do. You caught him, Roland said, in his thoughtful, near plodding way. No one else like Cook would have to be neck popped. Father smiled thinly. Perhaps not for a while, but in the end, someone always has to have his or her neck popped, as you so quaintly put it. The people demand it, sooner or later. If there isn't a turncoat, the people make one. Yes, Roland said, grasping the concept instantly. It was one he never forgot. But if you got him. No, his father said flatly. Why? For a moment, his father seemed on the verge of saying why, but he bit it back. We've talked long enough for now, I think. Go out for me. He wanted to tell his father not to forget his promise when the time came for Hax to step through the trap, but he was sensitive to his father's moods. He suspected his father wanted to fuck. He closed the door quickly. He was aware that his mother and father did that thing together, and he was reasonably well informed as to what that act was, but the mental picture that always condensed with the thought made him feel both uneasy and oddly guilty. Some years later, Susan would tell him the story of Oedipus, and he would absorb it in quiet thoughtfulness, thinking of the odd and bloody triangle formed by his father, his mother, and by Martin, known in some quarters as the good man, or perhaps it was a quadrangle, if one wished to add himself. Good night, father, Roland said. Good night, son, his father said absently, and began unbuttoning his shirt. In his mind, the boy was already gone, like father, like son. Gallows Hill was on the Farson Road, which was nicely poetic. Cuthbert might have appreciated this, but Roland did not. He did appreciate that the splendidly ominous scaffold which climbed into the brilliantly blue sky, a black and angular silhouette which overhung the coach road. The two boys had been let out of the morning exercises. Court had read the notes from their fathers laboriously, lips moving, nodding here and there. When he finished with them both, he looked up at the blue violet dawn sky and nodded again. Wait here, he said, and went toward the leaning stone hut that was his living quarters. He came back with a slice of rough, unleavened bread, broke it in two, and gave half to each. When it's over, each of you will put this beneath his shoes. Mind you do exactly as I say, or I'll clout you into next week. They had not understood until they arrived, riding double on Cuthbert's gelding. They were the first, fully 2 hours ahead of anyone else, and 4 hours before the hanging. And Gallow Hills stood deserted, except for the rooks and ravens. The birds were everywhere, and of course they were all black. They roosted noisily on the hard, jutting bar that overhung the trap, the armature of death. They sat in a row along the edge of the platform. They jostled for position on the stairs. They leave them, Cuthbert muttered, for the birds. Let's go up, Roland said. Cuthbert looked at him with something like horror. Do you think? Roland cut him off with a gesture of his hand. We're years early. No one will come. All right. They walked slowly toward the gibbet, and the birds took indignant wings, cawing and circling like a mob of angry, dispossessed peasants. Their bodies were flat and black against the pure dawnlight of the sky. For the first time, Roland felt the enormity of his responsibility in the matter. This wood was not noble, not part of an awesome machine of civilization, but merely warped pine covered with splattered white bird droppings. It was splashed everywhere, stairs, railing, platform, and it stank. The boy turned to Cuthbert with startled, terrified eyes and saw Cuthbert looking back at him with the same expression. I can't, Cuthbert whispered. I can't watch it. Roland shook his head slowly. There was a lesson here, he realized. Not a shining thing, but something that was old and rusty and misshapen. It was why their fathers had let them come, and with his unusual and with his unusual and with his usual stubborn and inarticulate doggedness, Roland laid mental hands on whatever it was. Can, Bert. I won't sleep tonight. Then you won't, Roland said, not seeing what it had what Roland said, not seeing what that had to do with it. Cuthbert suddenly seized Roland's hand and looked at him with such mute agony that Roland's own doubt came back, and he wished sickly that he had never gone to the West Kitchen that night. His father had been right. Better every man, woman, and child in Farson than this. But whatever the lesson, but whatever the lesson was, rusty half-buried thing, he would not let it go or give up his grip on it. Let's not go up, Cuthbert said. We've seen everything. And Roland nodded reluctantly, feeling his grip on that thing, whatever it was, weaken. Court, he knew, would have knocked them both sprawling and then forced them up to the platform step by cursing step, and sniffling fresh blood back up their noses as they went. Court would probably have looped a new hemp over the yard arm itself and put the noose around each of their necks in turn, would have made them stand in the trap to feel it, and Court would have been ready to strike them again if either wept or lost control of his bladder. And Court, of course, would have been right. For the first time in his life, Roland found himself hating his own childhood. He wished for the sizing, calluses, and sureness of age. He deliberately pried a splinter from the railings and placed it in his breast pocket before turning away. Why'd you do that? Cuthbert asked. He wished to answer something swaggering. Oh, the luck of the gallows. But he only looked at Cuthbert and shook his head. Just so I'll have it, he said. Always have it. They walked away from the gallows, sat down, and waited. In an hour or so, the first of them began to gather, mostly families who had come in broken down wagons and shays carrying their breakfasts with them, hampers and cold pancakes folded over fillings of wild strawberry jam. Roland felt his stomach growl hungrily and wondered again with despair where the honor and nobility of it was. It seemed to him that Hax in his dirty whites, walking around and around his steaming subterranean kitchen, had more honor than this. He fingered the splinter from the gallows tree with sick bewilderment. Cuthbert lay beside him with his face made impassive. In the end, it was not so much, and Roland was glad. Hax was carried in an open cart, but only his huge girth gave him away. He had been blindfolded with a wide black cloth that hung down over his face. Few threw stones, but most merely continued with their breakfasts. A gunslinger whom the boy did not know, he was glad his father had not drawn the lot, led the fat cook carefully up the steps. 2 guards of the watch had gone ahead and stood on either side of the trap. When Hax and the gunslinger reached the top, the gunslinger threw the noosed rope over the cross tree and then put it over the cook's head, dropping the knot until it lay just below the left ear. Birds had all flown, but Roland knew they were waiting. Do you wish to make confession? The gunslinger asked. I have nothing to confess, Hax said. His words carried well, and his voice was oddly dignified, in spite of the muffle of cloth which hung over his lips. The cloth ruffled slightly in the faint, pleasant breeze that had blown up. I have not forgotten my father's face. It has been with me through all. Roland glanced sharply at the crowd and was disturbed by what he saw there. A sense of sympathy, perhaps admiration. Who had asked his father? When traitors are called heroes, or heroes traitors, he supposed in his frowning way, dark times must have fallen. He wished he understood better. His mind flashed to Court and the bread Court had given them. He felt contempt. The day was coming when Court would serve him. Perhaps not Cuthbert. Perhaps Cuthbert would buckle under Court's steady fire and remain a page or a horseboy, or infinitely worse, a perfumed diplomat, dallying in receiving chambers or looking into bogus crystal balls with doddering kings and princes. But he would not. He knew it. Roland, I'm here. He took Cuthbert's hand, and their fingers locked together like iron. Trap dropped. Hacks plummeted through. In the sudden stillness, there was a sound. That sound an exploding pine knot makes on the earth during the cold winter night. But it was not so much. The cook's legs kicked out once in a wide Y. The crowd made a satisfied whistling noise. The guards of the watch dropped their military pose and began to gather things up negligently. The gunslinger walked back down the steps slowly, mounted his horse, and rode off, cutting roughly on through one gaggle of picnickers, making them scurry. The crowd dispersed rapidly after that, and in 40 minutes the two boys were left alone on the small hill they had chosen. The birds were returning to examine their new prize. One lit on Hax's shoulders and sat there timidly, darting its beak at the bright and shiny hoop Hax had always worn in his right ear. Doesn't look like him at all, Cuthbert said. Oh, yes, it does, Roland said confidently as they walked towards the gallows, the bread in their hands. Cuthbert looked abashed. They paused beneath the cross tree, looking up at the dangling, twisting body. Cuthbert reached up and touched one hairy angle, defiantly. The body started on a new, twisting arc. Then rapidly, they broke the bread and spread the crumbs beneath the dangling feet. Roland looked back just once as they rode away. There were thousands of birds. The bread, he grasped this only dimly, was symbolic then. It was good, Cuthbert said suddenly. I I liked it, I did. Roland was not shocked by this, although he had not particularly cared for the scene, but he thought he could perhaps understand it. I don't know about that, he said, but it was something. It surely was. The land did not fall to the good man for another 10 years, and by that time he was a gunslinger. His father was dead, he himself had become a matricide, and the world had moved on. The story of Roland in the past, the gunslinger himself. Chapter 3. Look, Jake said, pointing upward. The gunslinger looked up and felt an obscure joint in his back pop. They had been in the foothills 2 days now, so now we've reached the foothills. Here we are, greenery, trees, huge mountains up ahead. And although the water skins were almost empty again, it didn't matter now. There would soon be all the water they could drink. Followed the vector of Jake's finger upwards, past the rise of green plain to the naked and flashing cliffs and gorges above it, and on up toward the snow cap itself. Faint and far, nothing but a tiny dot, it might have been one of those motes that dance perpetually in front of the eyes, except for its constancy. The gunslinger beheld the man in black, moving up the slopes with deadly progress, a minuscule fly on a huge granite wall. That him? Jake asked. Ah, they've caught up to him. They found him. The gunslinger looked at the depersonalized mote, doing its faraway acrobatics, feeling nothing but a premonition of sorrow. That's him, Jake. You think we'll catch him? Not on this side. On the other. Not if we stand here talking about it. Because if you remember, he was getting to the mountains and then he was going to do some sort of meditation to regain his strength. That's what Sylvia Pittston told him. They're so high, Jake said. What's on the other side? I don't know, the gunslinger said. There might be a ocean and monsters on it. I don't think anybody does. Maybe they did once. Come on, boy. They began to move upward again, sending small runnels of pebbles and sand down towards the desert that washed away behind them, and a flat bake sheet that seemed to never end. Above them, far above, the man in black moved up and up and up. It was impossible to see if he looked back. He seemed to leap across impossible gulfs, scale sheer faces. Once or twice he disappeared, but always they saw him again, until the violent curtain of dusk shut him out of their view. When they made their camp for the evening, the boy spoke little, and the gunslinger wondered if the boy knew what he had already intuited. He thought of Cuthbert's face, hot, dismayed, excited. He thought of the crumbs. He thought of the birds. It ends this way, he thought. Again and again, it ends this way, with death. There are quests and roads that lead ever onward, and all of them end in the same place, upon the killing ground. Except, perhaps, the road to the tower. Boy, the sacrifice, his face innocent and very young in the light of the tiny fire. Fallen asleep over his beans, the gunslinger covered him with the horse blanket and curled up to sleep himself. So, something bad's gonna happen to this poor boy, Jake Chambers. Oracle. Got like 30 pages. So, yeah, sounds pretty good. I think we can do this. Yeah, yeah. Okay, moving on. Oracle and the Mountains. Boy found the Oracle, and it almost destroyed him. Some thin instinct brought the gunslinger up from sleep to the velvet darkness, which had fallen on them at dusk like the shroud of well water. That had been when he and Jake reached the grassy, nearly level oasis above the first rise of tumbled foothills. Even on the hard scrabble below, where they had toiled and fought for every foot in the killer sun, they had been able to hear the sound of crickets rubbing their legs seductively together in the perpetual green of willow groves above them. The gunslinger remained calm in his mind, and the boy had kept up at least the pretense of a facade that had made the gunslinger proud. But Jake hadn't been able to hide the wildness in his eyes, which were white and starry, the eyes of a horse scenting water and held back from bolting only by the tenuous chain of his master's mind, like a horse at the point where only understanding, not the spur, could hold it steady. The gunslinger could gauge the need in Jake by the madness the sounds of the crickets bred in his own body. His arms seemed to seek out shale to scrape on, and his knees seemed to beg to be ripped in tiny, maddening, salty gashes. The sun trampled down on them all the way, even when it turned a swollen, feverish red with sunset. It shone perversely through the knife cuts in the hills off to their left, blinding them and making every teardrop of sweat into a prison of pain. There was there was grass, at first only yellow scrub clinging to the bleak soil where the last of the runoff reached with gruesome vitality. Further up there was witchgrass, sparse, then green and rank. Then the first sweet smell of real grass mixed with timothy and shaded by the first of the dwarf firs. There the gunslinger saw an arc of brown movements in the shadows. He drew, fired, and felled a rabbit, all before Jake could begin to cry out his surprise. A moment later he had reholstered the gun. Here, the gunslinger said. Up ahead the grass deepened into a jungle of green willows that was shocking after the parched sterility of the endless hardpan. There would be a spring, perhaps several of them, and it would be even cooler, but it was better out here in the open. The boy had pushed every step he could push, and there might be sucker bats in the deeper shadows of the grove. The bats might break the boy's sleep, no matter how deep it was, and if they were vampires, neither of them might awaken, at least not in this world. The boy said, "I'll get some wood." The gunslinger smiled. "No, you won't. Sit yourself, Jake." Whose phrase had that been? Some woman. The boy sat. When the gunslinger got back, Jake was asleep in the grass. A large praying mantis was performing ablutions on the springy stem of Jake's cowlick. The gunslinger set fire and went after water. The willow jungle was deeper than he had suspected and confusing in the failing light, but he found a spring richly guarded by frogs and peepers. He filled one of their water skins and paused. The sounds that filled the night awoke an uneasy sensuality in him, a feeling that not even Allie, the woman he had bedded with in Tull, had been able to bring to the fore. Sensuality and fucking are rare, after all, cousins of the most tenuous relation. He chalked it up to the sudden blinding change from the desert. The softness of the dark seemed nearly decadent. He returned to the camp and skinned the rabbit while the water boiled over the fire. Mixed with the last of their canned food, the rabbit made an excellent stew. He woke Jake and watched him as he ate, bleary but ravenous. "We stay here tomorrow," the gunslinger said. "But that man you're after, that priest." "No priest. Don't worry. We've got him." "How do you know that?" Gunslinger could only shake his head. The knowledge was strong in him, but it was not a good knowledge. After the meal, he rinsed the cans they had eaten from, marveling again at his own water extravagance. And when he turned around, Jake was asleep again. The gunslinger felt the now familiar rising and falling in his chest that he could only identify with Cuthbert. Cuthbert had been Roland's own age, but he had seemed so much younger. His cigarette drooped towards the grass, and he tossed it to the fire. He looked at it. Clear yellow burned so different, so much cleaner from the way the devil grass burned. The air was so wonderfully cool, and he lay down with his back to the fire. Far away, though the gash that led the way into the mountains, through the gash that led the way into the mountains, he heard the thick mouth of the perpetual thunder. He slept and dreamed. Susan, his beloved, was dying before his eyes. as he watched, his arms held by two villagers on each side, his neck dog caught in a huge rusty iron collar. She was dying. Even through the thick stench of the fire, Roland could smell the dankness of the pits. He could see the color of his own madness. Susan, lovely girl at the window, horse drover's daughter. She was turning black in the flames, her skin cracking open. The boy, she was screaming. Roland, the boy! He whirled, pulling his captors with him. The collars ripped at his neck, and he heard the hitching, strangled sounds that were coming from his own throat. There was a sickish sweet smell of barbecuing meat on the air. The boy was looking down at him from a window high above the courtyard, the same window where Susan, who had taught him to be a man, had once sat and sung the old songs, Hey Jude, and Eased Down the Road, and 100 Leagues to Banbury Cross. He looked out from the window like the statue of an alabaster saint in a cathedral. His eyes were marble. A spike had been driven through Jake's forehead. The gunslinger felt the strangling, ripping scream that signaled the beginning of his lunacy pull from the gunslinger felt the strangling, ripping scream that signaled the beginning of his lunacy pull up from the root of his belly. Roland grunted a cry as he felt the fire singe him. He sat bolt upright in the dark, still feeling the dream around him, strangling him like a collar he had worn. In his twistings and turnings, he had thrown one hand against the dying coals of the fire. He put the hand to his face, feeling the dream flee, leaving only the stark picture of Jake, plaster white, a saint for demons. He glared around the mystic darkness of the willow grove, both guns out and ready. His eyes were red loopholes in the last glow from the fire. Jake! The gunslinger was up and on the run. The bitter circle of the moon had risen, and he could follow the boy's track in the dew. He ducked under the first of the willows, splashed through the spring, and legged up the far bank. Skidding in the dampness, even now his body could relish it. Willow-withs slapped at his face. The trees were thicker here, and the moon was blotted out. Tree trunks rose in lurching shadows. The grass was knee high, slapped. The grass, now knee high, slapped against him. Half rotted dead branches reached for his shins, his cojones. He paused for a moment, lifting his head and scenting at the air. A ghost of a breeze helped him. The boy did not smell good, of course. Neither of them did. The gunslinger's nostrils flared like those of an ape. The odor of sweat was faint, oily, unmistakable. He crashed over a deadfall of grass and bramble and downed branches, sprinted down a tunnel of overhanging willow and sumac. Moss struck his shoulders. Some clung in sighing gray tendrils. He clawed through he clawed through a last barricade of willows and came to a clearing that looked up at the stars and the highest peak of the range, gleaming skull white at an impossible altitude. There was a ring of tall black stones which looked like some sort of surreal animal trap in the moonlight. In the center of the table, in the center was a table of stone, an altar, very old, rising out of the ground on a powerful arm of basalt. The boy stood before it, trembling back and forth. His hands shook at his sides as if infused with static electricity. The gunslinger called his name sharply, and Jake responded with that inarticulate sound of negation. The faint smear of face, almost hidden by the boy's left shoulder, looked both terrified and exalted, and there was something else. The gunslinger stepped inside the ring, and Jake screamed, recoiling and throwing up his arms. Now his face could be seen clearly and indexed. The gunslinger saw fear and terror warring with an almost excruciating grimace of pleasure. The gunslinger felt it touch him. The spirit of the oracle, succubus. His loins were suddenly filled with a rose light, a light that was soft yet hard. He felt his head twisting, his tongue thickening, and becoming excruciatingly sensitive to even the spittle that coated it. He did not think when he pulled that half rotted jawbone from the pocket where he carried it, since he found it in the lair of the speaking demon at the way station. He did not think, but it did not frighten him to operate on pure instinct. He held the jawbone frozen prehistoric grin up in front of him, holding out his other arm stiffly. First and last fingers poked out in the very ancient forked talisman, the ward against the evil eye. The current of sensuality was whipped away from him like a drape. Jake screamed again. The gunslinger walked to him and held the jawbone in front of Jake's warring eyes, a wet sound of agony. The boy tried to pull his gaze away, could not, and suddenly both eyes rolled up to show the whites. Jake collapsed. His body struck the earth limply, one hand almost touching the altar. The gunslinger dropped to one knee and picked him up. He was amazingly light and dehydrated. He was amazingly light, as dehydrated as November leaf from the long walk through the desert. Around him, Roland could feel the presence that dwelt in the circle of stones, whirring with a jealous anger. Its prize had been taken from it. When the gunslinger passed out of the circle, the sense of frustrated jealousy faded. He carried Jake back to their camp. By the time they got there, the boy's twitching unconsciousness had become deep sleep. The gunslinger paused for a moment above the gray ruin of fire. The moonlight on Jake's face reminded him again of a church saint's alabaster purity, all unknown. He suddenly hugged the boy, knowing that he loved him, and it seemed that he could almost feel the laughter from the man in black, someplace far above them. Jake was calling him. That was how he awoke. He had tied the boy firmly to one of the tough bushes that grew nearby, and the boy was hungry and upset. By the sun, it was almost 9:30. "Why'd you tie me up?" Jake asked indignantly as the gunslinger loosened the thick knots in the blankets. "I wasn't going to run away." "You did run away," the gunslinger said. The expression on Jake's face made him smile. "I had to go out and get you. You were sleepwalking." "I was?" Jake looked at him suspiciously. The gunslinger nodded and suddenly produced the jawbone. He held it in front of Jake's face, and Jake flinched away from it, raising his arm. "See?" Jake nodded, bewildered. "I have to go off for a while now. I may be gone the whole day. So listen to me, boy. It's important. If sunset comes and I'm not back," fear flashed on Jake's face. "You're leaving me?" The gunslinger only looked at him. "No," Jake said after a moment. "I guess you're not. I want you to stay right here while I'm gone, and if you feel strange, funny in any way, you pick up this bone and hold it in your hands." Hate and disgust crossed Jake's face, mixed with bewilderment. I just couldn't." "You can. You may have to, especially after midday. It's important. Dig?" "Why do you have to go away?" Jake burst out. "I just do." The gunslinger caught another fascinating glimpse of the steel that lay under the boy's surface, as enigmatic as the story he had told about coming from a city where the buildings were so tall they actually scraped the sky. "All right," Jake said. Gunslinger laid the jawbone carefully on the ground next to the ruins of the fire, where it grinned up through the grass like some eroded fossil that has seen the light of day after a night of 5,000 years. Jake would not look at it. His face was pale and miserable. Gunslinger wondered if it would profit them for him to put the boy to sleep and question him, but he decided there would be little gain. He knew well enough that the spirit of the stone circle was surely a demon, and very likely an oracle as well. A demon with no shape, only a kind of unformed sexual glare with the eye of prophecy. He wondered sardonically if it might not be the soul of Sylvia Pittston, the giant woman whose religious stirring had led to the final showdown in Tull, but knew it was not. The stones in the circle had been ancient, this particular demon's territory staked out long before the earliest shade of prehistory. But the gunslinger knew the forms of speaking quite well and did not think the boy would have to use the jawbone mojo. The voice and mind of the oracle would be more than occupied with him, and the gunslinger needed to know things in spite of the risk. And the risk was high. For both Jake and himself, he needed desperately to know. The gunslinger opened his tobacco poke and pawed through it, pushing the driest strands of leaf aside until he came to a minuscule object wrapped in a fragment of white paper. He hefted it into his hand, looking absently up at the sky. Then he unwrapped it and held the contents. A tiny white pill with edges that had been much worn with traveling in his hands. Jake looked at it curiously. "What's that?" Gunslinger uttered a short laugh. "The philosopher's stone," he said. "Story that Court used to tell us was that the old gods pissed over the desert and made mescaline." Jake only looked puzzled. "A drug," the gunslinger said, "but not one that puts you to sleep, one that wakes you up all the way for a little while." "Like LSD?" The boy agreed instantly and then looked puzzled. "What's that?" "I don't know," Jake said. "It just popped out. I think it came from, before." Gunslinger nodded, but he was doubtful. He had never heard of mescaline referred to as LSD, not even in Martin's old books. "Will it hurt you?" Jake asked. "Never has," the gunslinger said, conscious of the evasion. "I don't like it." "Never mind." The gunslinger squatted in front of the water skin, took a mouthful, and swallowed the pill. As always, he felt an immediate reaction in his mouth. It seemed overloaded with saliva. He sat down before the dead fire. "When does something happen to you?" Jake asked. "Not for a little while. Be quiet." So Jake was quiet, watching with open suspicion as the gunslinger went calmly about the ritual of cleaning his guns. He reholstered them and said, "Your shirt, Jake. Take it off and give it to me." Jake pulled his faded shirt reluctantly over his head and gave it to the gunslinger. The gunslinger produced a needle that had been threaded into the side seam of his jeans and a thread from an empty cartridge loop in his gun belt. He began to sew up a long rip in one of the sleeves of the boy's shirt. He finished and handed the shirt back. He felt the mess beginning to take hold. There was a tightening in his stomach and a feeling that all the muscles in his body were being cranked up a notch. I have to go, he said, getting up. The boy half rose, his face a shadow of concern, and then he settled back. Be careful, he said. Please. Remember the jawbone, the gunslinger said. He put his hand on Jake's head, and he went by and tousled the corn colored hair. The gesture startled him into a short laugh. Jake watched after him with a troubled smile until he was gone into the willow jungle. The gunslinger walked deliberately towards the circle of stones, pausing once to get a cool drink from the spring. He could see his own reflection at the tiny pool edge with moss and lily pads, and he looked at himself for a moment, as fascinated as Narcissus. The reaction was beginning to settle in, slowing down his chain of thought by seeming to increase the connotations of every idea and every bit of sensory input. Things began to take on weight and thickness that had been heretofore invisible. He paused, getting to his feet again, and looked through the tangled snarl of willows. Sunlight slanted through in a golden, dusty bar, and he watched the interplay of motes and tiny flying things for a moment before going on. The drug often had disturbed him. His ego was too strong, or perhaps just too simple, to enjoy being eclipsed and peeled back, made a target for more sensitive emotions. They tickled at him like cat's whiskers, but this time he felt fairly calm. That was good. He stepped into the clearing and walked straight into the circle. He stood letting his mind run free. Yes, it was coming harder now, faster. The grass screamed green at him. It seemed that if he bent over and rubbed his hands in it, he would stand up with green paint all over his fingers and palms. He resisted a puckish urge to try the experiment, but there was no voice from the oracle, no sexual stirring. He went to the altar, stood beside it for a moment. Coherent thought, coherent thought was now almost impossible. His teeth felt strange in his head. The world held too much light. He climbed up on the altar and lay back. His mind was becoming a jungle full of strange thought plants and that he never his mind was becoming a jungle full of strange thought plants that he had never seen or suspected before, a willow jungle that had grown up around a mescaline spring. The sky was water and he hung suspended over it. The thought gave him a vertigo that seemed far away and unimportant. A line of old poetry occurred to him, not a nursery verse now, no. His mother had feared the drugs and the necessity of them, as she had feared court and the necessity for this beater of boys. This verse came from one of the dens to the north of the desert, where men still lived among the machines that usually didn't work, and which sometimes ate the men when they did. The lines played again and again, reminding him in an unconnected way that was typical of the mescaline rush, snow falling in a globe he had owned as a child, mystical and half fantastical. Beyond the reach of human range, a drop of hell, a touch of strange. The trees which overhung the altar contained faces. He watched them with abstracted fascination. Here was the dragon, green and twitching. Here a wood nymph with beckoning branch arms. Here a living skull overgrown with slime. Faces, faces. The grasses of the clearing suddenly whipped and bent. I come, I come! Vague stirrings within his flesh. How far have I come? He thought. Crouching from couching with Susan in sweet hay to this. She pressed over him, a body made of wind, a breast of sudden fragrant jasmine, rose, and honeysuckle. Maker of prophecy, he said. His mouth felt full of metal. Sigh, a faint sound of weeping. The gunslinger's genitals felt drawn and hard. Over him and beyond the faces and the leaves, he could see the mountain, hard and brutal, and full of teeth. The body moved against him, struggled with him. He felt his hands curl into fists. She had sent him a vision of Susan. It was Susan above him, lovely Susan at the window, waiting for him, with her hair spilled down her back and over her shoulders. He tossed his head, but her face followed. Jasmine, rose, honeysuckle, old hay, the smell of love. Love me. Speak prophecy, he said. Please, the oracle wept. Don't be cold. It's always so cold here. Hands slipping over his flesh, manipulating, lighting him on fire, pulling him, drawing a black crevice, the ultimate wanton, wet and warm. No, dry, cold, sterile. Have a touch of mercy, gunslinger. Ha, please. I beg your favor. Mercy. Would you have mercy on the boy? What boy? I know no boy. It's not boys I need. Oh, please. Jasmine, rose, honeysuckle, and dry hay with its ghost of summer clover, oil decanted from ancient urns, a riot for flesh. After, he said, now, please, now. He let his mind coil out at her, the antithesis of emotions. The body that hung over him froze and seemed to scream. There was a brief, vicious tug of war between his temples. His mind was the rope, gray and fibrous. For long moments there was no sound but the quiet hush of his breathing and the faint breeze which made the green faces in the trees shift, wink, and grimace. No bird sang. Her hold loosened. Again there was the sound of sobbing. It would have to be quick, or she would leave him. To stay now meant attenuation, perhaps her own kind of death. Already he felt her drawing away to leave the circle of stones. Wind rippled the grass in tortured patterns. Prophecy, he said, a bleak noun, a weeping, tired sigh. He could almost have granted the mercy she begged, but there was Jake. He would have found Jake dead or insane if he had been any later last night. Sleep, then. No, then half sleep. Gunslinger turned his eyes up to the faces in the leaves. A play was being enacted there for his amusement. Worlds rose and fell before him. Empires were built across shining sands where forever machines toiled in abstract electronic frenzies. Empires declined and fell. Wheels that had spun like silent liquid moved more slowly, began to squeak, began to scream, stopped. Sand choked the stainless steel gutters of concentric streets below dark skies, full of stars like beds of cold jewels. All through it, and through it all, a dying wind of change blew, bringing with it the cinnamon smell of late October. Gunslinger watched as the world moved on, and half slept. 3. This is the number of your fates. 3? Yes, 3 is mystic. 3 stands at the heart of the mantra. Which 3? We see in part, and thus is the mirror of prophecy darkened. Tell me what you can. The first is young, dark haired. He stands on the brink of robbery and murder. A demon has infested him. The name of the demon is heroin. Which demon is that? I know it not, even from my nursery stories. We see in part, and thus is the mirror of prophecy darkened. There are other worlds, Gunslinger, and other demons. These waters are deep. The second? She comes on wheels. Her mind is iron, but her heart and eyes are soft. I see no more. The third? In chains. The man in black? Where is he? Near. You will speak with him. Of what will we speak? The tower. The boy? Jake? Tell me of the boy. The boy is your gateway to the man in black. The man in black is your gate to the 3. The 3 are your way to the dark tower. How? How can that be? Why must it be? We see in part, and thus is the mirror. God damn you. No, god damn me. Don't patronize me, thing. I'm stronger than you. What do they call you then? Star slut? Whore of the winds? Some live on love that comes to the ancient places. Even in these sad and evil times, some gunslinger live on blood. Even I understand on the blood of young boys. May he not be spared? Yes. How? Cease, gunslinger. Strike your camp and turn west. In the west, there is still a need for men who live by the bullet. I am sworn by my father's guns and by the treachery of Martin. Martin is no more. The man in black has eaten his soul. This, you know. I am sworn. Then you are damned. Have your way with me, bitch. Eagerness. So there's his prophecy. He has his prophecy, and now he must fulfill his part of the deal with his demon. The shadow swung over him and folded him. Suddenly, ecstasy broke only by a galaxy of pain, as faint and bright as ancient stars gone red with collapse. Faces came to him unbidden at the climax of their coupling. Sylvia Pittston, Alice, the woman from Toll, Susan, Eileen, and 100 others. And finally, after an eternity, he pushed her away from him, once again in his right mind, bone weary and disgusted. No, it isn't enough. It. Let me be, the gunslinger said. He sat up and almost fell off the altar before regaining his feet. She touched him tentatively. Honeysuckle, jasmine, sweet attar. And he pushed her violently, falling to his knees. He staggered up and made his drunken way to the perimeter of the circle. He staggered through, feeling a huge weight fall from his shoulders. He drew a shuddering, weeping breath. As he started away, he could feel her standing at the bars of her prison, watching him go from her. He wondered how long it might be before someone else crossed the desert and found her, hungry and alone. For a moment, he felt dwarfed by the possibilities of time. You're sick! Jake stood up fast when the gunslinger shambled back through the last trees and came into camp. Jake had been humbled by the ruins of the tiny fires, the jawbone across his knees, gnawing disconsolately on the bones of the rabbit. Now that he had Now he ran toward the gunslinger with a look of distress that made Roland feel the full. First time they call him Roland here. Roland the full ugly weights of the coming betrayal. One he sensed, which might only be the first of many. No, he said, not sick, just tired. I'm whipped. He gestured absently at the jawbone. You can throw that away. Jake threw it quickly and violently, rubbing his hands across his shirt after doing it. The gunslinger sat down, almost fell down, feeling the aching joints and the pummeled, thick mind that was the unlovely. The gunslinger sat down, almost fell down, feeling the aching joints and the pummeled, thick mind that was the unlovely afterglow of mescaline. His crotch also pulsed with a dull ache. He rolled a cigarette with careful, unthinking slowness. Jake watched. The gunslinger had a sudden impulse to tell him what he had learned, then thrust the idea away with horror. He wondered if a part of him, mind or soul, might not be disintegrating. We sleep here tonight, the gunslinger said. Tomorrow we climb. I'll go out a little later and see if I can't shoot something for supper. I've got to sleep now, okay? Sure. The gunslinger nodded and lay back. When he woke up, the shadows were long across the small grass clearing. Build up the fire, he told Jake, and tossed him his flint and steel. Can you use that? Yes, I think so. The gunslinger walked toward the willow grove and then turned left, skirting it. At a place where the ground opened up and upward, in a heavy open grass, he stepped back into the shadows and stood silently. Faintly, clearly, he could hear the click, clink, click, clink of Jake's striking sparks. He stood without moving for 10 minutes, 15, 20. Three rabbits came, and the gunslinger pulled leather. He took down the two plumpest, skinned them, and gutted them, brought them back to camp. Jake had the fire going, and the water was already steaming over it. The gunslinger nodded to him. That's a good piece of work. Jake flushed with pleasure and silently handed back the flint and steel. While the stew cooked, the gunslinger used the last of the light to go back to the willow grove. Near the first pull, he began to hack at the tough vines that grew near the water's marshy verge. Later, as the fire burned down to the coals and Jake slept, he would plait them into ropes that might be of some limited use later. But he did not think somehow that the climb would be a particularly difficult one. He felt a sense of fate that he no longer even considered odd. The vines bled green sap over his hands as he carried them back to where Jake awaited. So he knows that he has to go through this. He just has to continue on forward. Most likely going to betray Jake in some sort of way. But he will reach the man in black. They will speak of the tower. And then after that, somehow the number 3 will lead him to the tower. Right? That's what the demon told him. They were up with the sun and packed in half an hour. The gunslinger hoped to shoot another rabbit in the meadow as they fed, but time was short and no rabbit showed itself. The bundle of the remaining food was now so small and light that Jake carried it easily. He had toughened up, this boy. You could see it. The gunslinger carried their water, freshly drawn from one of the springs. He looped his 3 vine ropes around his belly. They gave the circle of stones a wide berth. The gunslinger was afraid the boy might feel a recurrence of fear. But when they passed above it on the stony rise, Jake only offered a passing glance, and then looked at a bird that hovered upwind. Soon enough, the trees began to lose their height and lushness. Trunks were twisted, and roots seemed to struggle with the earth in a tortured hunt for moisture. Also old, Jake said glumly when they paused for a rest. Is there anything young? The gunslinger smiled and gave Jake an elbow. You are, he said. Will it be a hard climb? The gunslinger looked at him curious. Mountains are high. Don't you think it will be a hard climb? Jake looked back at him, his eyes clouded, puzzled. No. They went on. The sun climbed to its zenith. It seemed to hang there more briefly than it ever had during the desert crossing, then passed on, giving them back their shadows. Shelves of rock protruded from the rising land like the arms of giant easy chairs buried in the earth. The scrub grass turned yellow and sere. Finally, they were faced with a deep chimney-like crevice in their path, and they scaled a short, peeling rise of rock to get around and above it. The ancient granite had faulted on lines that were step-like, and as they both intuited, the climb was an easy one. They paused on the 4 foot wide scarp at the top and looked back over the falling land to the desert, which curled around the upland like a huge yellow paw. Further off, it gleamed at them in a white shield that dazzled the eye, receding into dim waves of rising heat. Gunslinger felt faintly amazed at the realization that this desert had nearly murdered him. From where they stood in the new coolness, the desert certainly appeared momentous, but not deadly. All that time changes everything, right? Now they're here new part of their journey, and the desert is nothing but a distant memory. Crazy. They turned back to the business of the climb, scrambling over the jackstraw falls of the rock, and crouch walking up inclined planes of stone shot with glitters of quartz and mica. The rock was pleasantly warm to the touch, but the air was definitely cooler. In the late afternoon, the gunslinger heard the faint sound of thunder. The rising line of the mountains obscured the sight of the rain on the other side, however. When the shadows began to turn purple, they camped in the overhang of a jutting brow of rock. The gunslinger anchored their blanket above and below, fashioning a kind of shanty lean to. They sat at the mouth of it, watching the sky spread a cloak over the world. Jake dangled his feet over the drop. The gunslinger rolled his evening smoke and eyed Jake half humorously. Don't roll over in your sleep, he said, or you may wake up in hell. I won't, Jake replied seriously. My mother says. He broke it off. She says what? That I sleep like a dead man, Jake finished. He looked at the gunslinger, who saw that the boy's mouth was trembling as he strove to keep back tears. Only a boy, he thought, and pain smote him. Like the ice pick that took like the ice pick that too much cold water can sometimes plant in the forehead. Only a boy. Why? Silly question. When a boy, wounded in body or spirit, called that question out to court, the ancient scarred battle engine whose job it was to teach the sons of gunslingers the beginnings of what they had to know, court would answer, Why is a crooked letter why is a crooked letter and can't be made straight? Never mind why. Just get up, pusshead. Get up. The day's young. Why am I here? Jake asked. Why did I forget everything from before? So yeah, he was during his the gunslinger trainer, and then 10 years later, after all of that happened, our story there, Roland's world ended. How? Maybe we'll find out someday, but not in this book. Because the man in black has drawn you here, the gunslinger said, and because of the tower. The tower stands at a kind of power nexus in time. I don't understand that. Nor do I, the gunslinger said. But something has been happening, just in my own time. The world has moved on, we've always said, but it's moving on faster now. Something has happened to time. They sat in silence. So interesting. This book is so cool. um, they sat in silence, a breeze faint but with an edge picked at their legs. Somewhere it made a hollow whoo in a rock fissure. Where do you come from? Jake asked. From a place that no longer exists. Do you know the Bible? Jesus and Moses, sure. The gunslinger smiled. That's right. My land had a biblical name, New Canaan, it was called, the land of milk and honey. In the Bible's Canaan, there were supposed to be grapes so big that men had to carry them on sledges. We didn't grow them that big, but it was a sweet land. I know about Ulysses, Jake said hesitantly. Was he in the Bible? Maybe, the gunslinger said. The book is lost now, all except the parts I was forced to memorize. But the others, no others, the gunslinger said. I'm the last. A tiny wasted moon began to rise, casting its slitted gaze down into the tumble of rocks where they sat. Was it pretty? Your country? Your land? It was beautiful, the gunslinger said absently. There were fields and rivers and mists in the morning, but that's only pretty. My mother used to say that the only real beauty is order and love and light. Jake made a non-committal noise. The gunslinger smoked and thought of how it had been the nights in the huge central hall, hundreds of richly clad figures moving through the slow, steady waltz steps, or the faster, light ripples of the pull calm. Eileen on his arms, her eyes brighter than the most precious gems, the light of the crystal enclosed electrical lights making highlights in the newly done hair of the courtesans and their half cynical amours, that's loves. The hall had been huge, an island of light whose age was beyond telling, and was the whole central place, which was made up of nearly 100 stone castles. It had been 12 years since he had seen it, and leaving for the last time, Roland had ached as he turned his face away from it and began his first cast for the trail of the man in black. 12 years that he's been on his journey. Even then, 12 years ago, the walls had fallen, weeds grew in the courtyards, bats roosted among the great beams of the central hall, and the galleries echoed with the soft swoop and whisper of swallows. The fields where court had taught them archery and gunnery and falconry were gone to hay and timothy and wild vines. In the huge, echoey kitchen where Hax had once held his own fuming and aromatic court, a grotesque colony of slow mutants nested, peering at him from the merciful darkness of pantries and shadowed pillars. The warm steam that had been filled with The warm steam that had been filled with the pungent odors of roasting beef and pork had been transmuted to the clammy damp of moss, and huge white toadstools grew in the corners where not even the slow mutants dared to encamp. The huge oak subcellar bulkhead stood open, and the most poignant smell of all had issued from that, an odor that seemed to symbolize with a flat finality all the hard facts of dissolution and decay, the high sharp odor of wine gone to vinegar. It had been no struggle to turn his face to the south and leave it behind, but it had hurt his heart. Interesting. So even before he headed off on this journey, even his own world had, as they say, moved on, and all the people gone. The slow mutants, whatever. So that's coming up. The slow mutants. We'll find out. We shall find out. But yeah, they had already infested his lands. Was there a war? Jake asked. Even better, the gunslinger said, and pitched the last smoldering ember of his cigarette away. There was a revolution. We won every battle and lost the war. No one won the war, unless maybe it was the scavengers. They must have been rich pickings for years after. I wish I'd lived there, Jake said wistfully. It was another world, the gunslinger said. Time to turn in. The boy, now only a dim shadow, turned on his side and curled up with the blanket tossed loosely over him. The gunslinger sat sentinel over him for perhaps an hour after, thinking his long, sober thoughts. Such meditations was a new thing for him, novel, sweet in a melancholy sort of way, but still utterly without practical value. There was no solution to the problem of Jake other than the one the oracle had offered, and that was simply not possible. So the offer was to go to the west, to run away to the west. That's the only way to save Jake at this point. Otherwise, he's going to die. He's going to die in order for Roland to reach the man in black. And that's not happening. There's just no way that Roland's giving up his quest. There might have been a tragedy in the situation, but the gunslinger did not see that. He saw only the predestination that had always been there. And finally, his more natural character reasserted itself, and he slept deeply with no dreams. So he finally just accepted it. He just knew that this is what has to happen. Time to get some sleep. The climb became grimmer on the following day as they continued to angle toward the narrow V of the pass through the mountains. The gunslinger pushed slowly, still with no sense of hurry. He loves the boy Jake, and he doesn't want to send him away too soon, right? The dead stone beneath their feet left no trace of the man in black, but the gunslinger knew he had been this way before them, and not only from the path of his climb as he and Jake had observed him, tiny and bug-like from the foothills. His aroma was printed on every cold downdraft of air. It was an oily, sardonic odor, as bitter to his nose as the aroma of devil grass. Jake's hair had grown much longer, and it curled slightly at the base of his sunburned neck. He climbed tough, moving with sure-footedness and no apparent acrophobia, as they crossed gaps or scaled their way up ledged facings. Twice already he had gone up in places the gunslinger could not have managed. Jake had anchored one of his ropes so the gunslinger could climb up hand over hand. He couldn't have done it without Jake, and there's no way he could have completed this task without this poor boy who was killed in New York and sent to this strange world. The following morning, they climbed through a coldly damp snatch of cloud that began blotting over the tumbled slopes below them. Patches of hard, granulated snow began to appear nestled in some of the deeper pockets of stone. It glittered like quartz, and its texture was dry as sand. That afternoon, they found a single footprint in one of the snow patches. Jake stared at it for a moment with awful fascination, and then looked up frightfully, as if expecting to see the man in black materialize into his own footprint. The gunslinger tapped him on the shoulder and then pointed ahead. Go, the day is getting old. Later, they made camp in the last of the daylight on a wide flat ledge to the east and north of the cut that slanted into the heart of the mountains. The air was frigid. They could see puffs of their breath, and the humid sound of thunder in the red and purple afterglow of the day was surreal, slightly lunatic. The gunslinger thought the boy might begin to question him, but there were no questions from Jake. The boy fell almost immediately into sleep. The gunslinger followed his example. He dreamed again of the dark place in the earth, the dungeon, and again of Jake as an alabaster saint with a nail through his forehead. He woke again with a gasp, instinctively reaching for the jawbone that was no longer there, expecting to feel the grass of that ancient grove. He felt rock instead, and the cold thinness of altitude in his lungs. Jake was asleep beside him, but his sleep was not easy. He twisted and mumbled inarticulate words to himself, chasing his own phantoms. The gunslinger laid over uneasily and slept again. They were another week before they reached the end of the beginning. For the Gunslinger, a twisted prologue of 12 years from the final crash of his native place and the gathering of the other three. Uh, Very interesting the way that's worded. I love that. Yep. They were another week before they reached the end of the beginning. So here we are, reaching the end of, well, not completely towards the end, but yeah, see the slow mutants, and then he's gonna go and talk to the Man in Black. We're reaching the end of the beginning of our tale because, like I said, this is the first book. Dark Tower series is a total of 8 books, in addition to the Wind Through the Keyhole, which honestly I haven't read that one. I have not ever finished the Wind Through the Keyhole, but that one's supposed to fit between, I think it's book 4 and book 5. So it doesn't really uh add or subtract it. Well, I mean, it adds, but it doesn't really subtract anything if you don't read it necessarily. But I if we get to it, I will read it where it belongs. So between whatever books that it's supposed to go through. But will we get there? Who knows? We got lots of books to read. The next one is called The Drawing of the Three. For the Gunslinger, a twisted prologue of 12 years from the final crash of his native place and the gathering of the other three. For Jake, the gateway had been a strange death in another world. For the Gunslinger, it had been a stranger death yet. The endless hunt for the Man in Black through a world with neither map nor memory. Cuthbert and the others were gone, all of them gone. Randolph, Jamie DeCurry, Eileen, Susan, Martin. Yes, they had dragged him down, and there had been gunplay. And even that grape had been bitter. Until finally, only 3 remained of the old world. 3, like dreadful cards from a terrible deck of tarot cards: Gunslinger, Man in Black, and the Dark Tower. A week after Jake saw the footsteps, they faced the Man in Black for a brief moment of time. In that moment, the gunslinger felt he could almost understand the grave implication of the tower itself. That moment seemed to stretch out forever. They continued southwest, reaching a point perhaps halfway through the Cyclopean mountain range, and just as the going seemed about to become really difficult, for the first time, above them, seeming to lean out the icy ledges and screaming butts that made the gunslinger feel an unpleasant reverse and vertigo, they began to descend again along the side of a narrow pass. An angular, zigzagging path led them toward a canyon floor where an ice-edged stream boiled with salty, headlong power from the higher country still. Oh, Slatty. An angular, zigzagging path led them toward a canyon floor where the ice-edged stream boiled with slatty, headlong power from the higher country still. On that afternoon, the boy paused and looked back at the gunslinger, who had paused to wash his face in the stream. I smell him, Jake said. So do I. Ahead of them, the mountain threw up its final defense, a huge slab of insurmountable granite a huge slab of insurmountable granite facing that climbed into cloudy infinity. At any moment, the gunslinger expected a twist in the stream to bring them upon a high waterfall and the insurmountable smoothness of rock. Dead end. But the air here had that odd magnifying quality that is common to high places, and it was another day before they reached the great granite face. Gunslinger began to feel the dreadful tug of anticipation again, the feeling that it was all finally in his grasp. Near the end, he had to fight himself to keep from breaking into a trot. Wait! The boy stopped suddenly. They faced a sharp elbow bend in the stream. It boiled and frothed with high energy around the eroded hang of a giant sandstone boulder. All that morning they had been in the shadow of the mountains, and the canyon narrowed. Jake was trembling violently. His face had gone pale. What's the matter? Let's go back, Jake whispered. Let's go back, quick. The gunslinger's face was wooden. Please, the boy's face was drawn, and his jawline shook with suppressed agony. Through the heavy blanket of stone, they still heard thunder, as steady as machines in the earth. The slice of sky they could see had itself assumed a turbulent gothic gray above them, as warm and cold currents met and warred. Please, please! The boy raised a fist as if to strike the boy raised a fist as if to strike the gunslinger's chest. No. The boy's face took on wonder. You're going to kill me. He killed me the first time, and you're going to kill me now. Gunslinger felt the lie on his lips. He spoke it. You'll be all right. And a great lie. I'll take care. Jake's face went gray, and he said no more. He put an unwilling hand out, and he and the gunslinger went around the elbow bend. They came face to face with that final rising wall, and the man in black. He stood no more than 20 feet above them, just to the right of the waterfall that crashed and spilled from the huge ragged hole in the rock. Unseen wind rippled and tugged at his hooded robe. He held a staff in one hand, the other hand he held out to them in a mocking gesture of welcome. He seemed a prophet, and below that rushing sky, mounted on the ledge of rock, a prophet of doom. His voice, the voice of Jeremiah. Gunslinger, how well you fulfill the prophecies of old. Good day and good day and good day. Ha ha ha, he laughed, the sound echoing ever over the bellow of the falling water. Without a thought and seemingly without a click of motor relays, the gunslinger had drawn his pistols. The boy cowered to his right and behind a small shadow. Roland fired 3 times before he could gain control of his traitor hands. The echoes bounced their bronze tones against the rock valley that rose around them, over the sound of the wind and the water. A spray of granite puffed over the head of the man in black, a second to the left of his hood, a third to the right. He had missed cleanly all 3 times. The man in black laughed, a full, hearty laugh that seemed to challenge the receding echo of gunshots. Would you kill all your answers so easily, gunslinger? Damn. Come down, the gunslinger said. Answers all around. Again, that huge derisive laugh. It's not your bullets I fear, Roland. It's your idea of answers that scares me. Come down. The other side, I think, the man in black said. On the other side, we will hold much counsel. His eyes flicked to Jake, and he added, just the 2 of us. Jake flinched away from him with a small whining cry, and the man in black turned, his robe swirling in the gray air like a bat wing. He disappeared into the cleft in the rock from which the water spewed at full force. The gunslinger exercised grim will and did not send a bullet after him. Would you kill all your answers so easily, gunslinger? So the proper way to read that: the gunslinger exercised grim will and did not send a bullet after him. Would you kill all your answers so easily, gunslinger? There was only the sound of wind and water, sounds that had been in this place of desolation for 1,000 years. Yet the man in black had been here. After these 12 years, Roland had seen him close up, spoken to him, and the man in black had laughed at him. On the other side, we will hold much counsel. The boy looked up at him with dumbly submissive sheep's eyes, his body trembling. For a moment, the gunslinger saw the face of Alice, the girl from Toll, superimposed over Jake's, the scar standing out on her forehead like a mute accusation, and felt brute loathing for them both. It would not occur to him until much later that both the scar on Alice's forehead and the nail he saw spiked through Jake's forehead in his dreams were in the same place. Jake seemed to catch a whiff of his thought, and a moan was dragged from his throat, but it was short. He twisted his lips shut over it. He held the makings of a fine man, perhaps a gunslinger in his own right, if given time. Just the 2 of us. The gunslinger felt a great and unholy thirst in some deep unknown pit of his body, thirst no wine could touch. Words trembled almost within reach of his fingers, and in some instinctual way he strove not to be corrupted, knowing in his colder mind that such strife was vain and always would be. It was noon. He looked up, letting the cloudy, unsettled daylight shine for the last time on the all too vulnerable sun of his own righteousness. No one ever really pays for it in silver, he thought. The price of any evil, necessary or otherwise, comes due in flesh. Come with me or stay, the gunslinger said. The boy only looked at him mutely. What a choice! What a choice, right? And to the gunslinger, in that final and vital moment of uncoupling from a moral principle, he ceased to be Jake and became only the boy, an impersonality to be moved and used. Something screamed in the windy stillness. He and the boy both heard. The gunslinger began, and after a moment Jake came after. Together they climbed toward the tumbled rock beside the steely cold falls, and stood where the man in black had stood before them. And together they entered in where he had disappeared. Darkness swallowed them. I think that's the altars and the stones. I know that might be a campfire. Oh no, that's the first footstep of the man in black that they saw, right? I'm pretty sure. Which brings us here. So mutants. Okay, so our next stream for reading, we might do Sandland tomorrow. If I do stream reading, finishing this book, the 50, like 70 pages or so to go. So good. I love this book. I love this series. I love all the lore. I love the way he built the world. Oh my god, like it's like You have no idea what's gonna happen. You have no clue, chat, what could potentially happen in the future in this series. You know, I mean, like I said, they ruin it. They spoil it all within like the first 20 minutes or so of like the movie. But here, it's like the world has moved on. What does that even mean? What are you talking about? You know? There's technology like there's that the tapper that they're able to get water from over in the way station. So there's the you know, like leftover technologies. He came from a place that wasn't technologically fully advanced. Like, he can't dream of a place like New York, but you know, like they had some civilization. So interesting, so freaking interesting. I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you for stopping by. If you have, catching us on the replay, if anything. Um, Everybody, take care of yourselves. Make sure you're reading a good book, you're drinking plenty of water, you are eating something good and nutritious. Make sure you're washing your freaking hands, soap and hot water. Super important. Soap and hot water. That's how you kill bacteria. um, I'm pretty sure we're gonna finish this before we start Maze Runner. I'm thinking tomorrow Sandland, maybe some Monster Hunter. So then I think we'll probably finish it on Tuesday. We'll probably finish Dark Tower, the Gunslinger on Tuesday. And then still not sure which day I'm gonna do it, but we will do the Maze Runner all in one go. So everybody, take care of yourselves. Happy Easter's if you celebrated today. Happy Sunday, just because I mean not Sundays. It is Sunday. Happy Sunday, just for Sunday's sake. Good to see you. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you later. Meow, 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 meow. Bye. It's been fun. Take care.